I paid $60,000 for a European dream vacation to reconnect with my parents. But when I pulled up to the airport curbside, my mother snatched the itinerary from my hands and handed my first-class ticket to my unemployed sister. She smiled that cold, practiced smile and said, "Tanisha needs this break more than you do, Nia. You can just work more." I stood on the pavement, watching my family and my sister's deadbeat fiancé walk into the terminal with my luggage. They thought I would just go home and cry. They had no idea that before their plane even touched down in Rome, I would turn their dream vacation into a homeless nightmare. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my life and my assets, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank instead of the family member. My name is Naya, and at 32 years old, I fix disasters for a living. I am a crisis manager for Fortune 500 companies. If a CEO tweets something offensive or a product fails, I am the one they call to clean it up. I am ruthless, efficient, and very well paid. But the one crisis I could never manage was my own family. I grew up in a cramped apartment in Queens, watching my parents Otis and Verna pour every ounce of their love and resources into my younger sister Tanisha. Tanisha was the golden child, the one who needed protection, the one who was too fragile for the real world. I was the strong one, the one who did not need help, the one who was expected to give not receive. This trip was supposed to be different. I had planned a 2-week tour of Italy and France just for me and my parents. No Tanisha, no drama, just a chance to finally bond with them without my sister's constant demands for attention and money. I had booked everything: 5-star hotels, private tours, Michelin star reservations. I wanted to show them that I was worthy of their time. I checked the folder on the passenger seat of my Range Rover one last time. Passports, tickets, vouchers, everything was perfect. I pulled up to my parents' house in Queens, honking the horn lightly. I expected to see just the two of them with reasonable luggage. Instead, the front door opened and it looked like a clown car unloading. My father Otis dragged out 2 massive suitcases. My mother Verna followed with 3 more. And then my stomach dropped. Tanisha walked out wearing oversized sunglasses and a tracksuit, followed by Brad. Brad was Tanisha's fiancé. He was a 30-year-old white guy who called himself a conceptual artist, but mostly just played video games in my parents' basement. He was dragging a duffel bag that looked like it had survived a war. I rolled down the window, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is going on? Why are Tanisha and Brad here with luggage?" Verna walked up to the car window, ignoring my question. "Pop the trunk, Nia. We are running late." "Mom," I said, stepping out of the car. "This trip is for us. Just the 3 of us. The reservation is for 3 people." Otis grunted, lifting a heavy bag into my trunk without asking. "Change of plans, baby girl. We could not leave your sister behind. She has been so stressed lately with the wedding planning. She needs a release. Stressed." Tanisha had not worked a day in 4 years. Her biggest stress was deciding what filter to use on Instagram. "And Brad?" I asked, pointing at the man currently trying to shove his dirty duffel bag onto my leather seats. "He is family," Verna said firmly. "Now get in the car. We can discuss this on the way." I paid $60,000 for a European dream vacation to reconnect with my parents. But when I pulled up to the airport curbside, my mother snatched the itinerary from my hands and handed my first-class ticket to my unemployed sister. She smiled that cold, practiced smile and said, "Tanisha needs this break more than you do, Nia. You can just work more. Just work." I stood on the pavement watching my family and my sister's deadbeat fiancé walk into the terminal with my luggage. They thought I would just go home and cry. They had no idea that before their plane even touched down in Rome, I would turn their dream vacation into a homeless nightmare. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my life and my assets, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank instead of the family member. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I fix disasters for a living. I am a crisis manager for Fortune 500 companies. If a CEO tweets something offensive or a product fails, I am the one they call to clean it up. I am ruthless, efficient, and very well paid. But the one crisis I could never manage was my own family. I grew up in a cramped apartment in Queens, watching my parents, Otis and Verna, pour every ounce of their love and resources into my younger sister, Tanisha. Tanisha was the golden child, the one who needed protection, the one who was too fragile for the real world. I was the strong one, the one who did not need help, the one who was expected to give, not receive. This trip was supposed to be different. I had planned a 2-week tour of Italy and France just for me and my parents. No Tanisha, no drama, just a chance to finally bond with them without my sister's constant demands for attention and money. I had booked everything: 5-star hotels, private tours, Michelin star reservations. I wanted to show them that I was worthy of their time. I checked the folder on the passenger seat of my Range Rover one last time. Passports, tickets, vouchers. Everything was perfect. I pulled up to my parents' house in Queens, honking the horn lightly. I expected to see just the two of them, with reasonable luggage. Instead, the front door opened, and it looked like a clown car unloading. My father Otis dragged out 2 massive suitcases. My mother Verna followed with 3 more. And then my stomach dropped. Tanisha walked out wearing oversized sunglasses and a tracksuit, followed by Brad. Brad was Tanisha's fiancé. He was a 30-year-old white guy who called himself a conceptual artist, but mostly just played video games in my parents' basement. He was dragging a duffel bag that looked like it had survived a war. I rolled down the window, trying to keep my voice steady. What is going on? Why are Tanisha and Brad here with luggage? I pulled my Range Rover up to the curb of the 2-story brick house in Queens that I had paid off for my parents 3 years ago. I put the car in park and took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for 2 weeks of close quarters with Otis and Verna. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, ensuring my armor was in place. Perfect hair, perfect blazer, perfect smile. I was ready to be the dutiful daughter. I was ready to buy their love with 5-star hotels and private tours of the Vatican. But as I looked out the window, my smile faltered. There was a mountain of luggage stacked on the sidewalk. I counted them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 suitcases, massive hard-shell cases that looked like they were packed for a relocation, not a 2-week vacation. My parents were heavy packers, but this was ridiculous. I had told them specifically that the internal flights in Europe had strict weight limits. I was about to honk when the front door swung open. My father Otis stepped out first, struggling with a garment bag. My mother Verna followed, looking like she was dressed for a church fashion show in a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses. But they were not alone. My stomach tightened as I saw my younger sister Tanisha strut out behind them. She was wearing a pink velour tracksuit that looked 2 sizes too small, and she was dragging a Louis Vuitton duffel bag that I knew for a fact was a knockoff. And trailing behind her like a lost puppy was Brad. My stomach did not just tighten, it rolled over. Brad was Tanisha's fiancé, a 30-year-old white man who claimed to be a conceptual artist, but whose only real talent seemed to be avoiding gainful employment and borrowing money he never paid back. He looked disheveled as usual, wearing cargo shorts and a stained t-shirt that read, "Game Over." He was carrying a backpack and a guitar case. I stepped out of the car, slamming the door harder than I intended. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks, but I felt hot with sudden irritation. "Mom." "Dad?" I called out, walking toward the luggage barricade. "What is going on here? I thought we discussed the luggage limits. And why are Tanisha and Brad here? Did they need a ride to the subway?" Verna adjusted her sunglasses and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the same smile she used when she asked to borrow money for a bill she had already paid. "Oh, stop fussing, Nia," she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "We are not taking the subway. We are all going to the airport." I blinked, sure I had misheard. I looked at Tanisha, who was busy checking her reflection in the window of my car, and then at Brad, who was lighting a cigarette right next to my father. Going to the airport, I repeated slowly. To see us off. Verna laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Do not be silly, baby girl. To come with us. We decided it would be a shame to leave them behind when we are going to see such beautiful things. The more the merrier, right? Besides, Tanisha has been so stressed lately. She needs this. The automatic doors of JFK Terminal 4 slid open, and the noise hit me like a physical wave. I marched toward the first-class check-in counter, my heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the polished floor. Otis and Brad were struggling with the mountain of luggage behind me, but I did not offer to help. My mind was racing, trying to calculate the cost of 2 extra last-minute tickets to Rome. Maybe I could just buy them economy seats on a different flight, anything to get them away from me. I approached the pristine white counter where a flight attendant with a perfect bun and a silk scarf smiled at me. "Welcome to Emirates First Class," she said. "May I have your passports, please?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out the leather folder containing my passport and my parents' passports. I placed them on the counter with a sigh of relief. "Just 3 passengers," I said, trying to ignore the circus performing behind me. "Nia Brooks, Otis Brooks, and Verna Brooks. We are on the flight to Rome." The agent began typing, her long manicured fingernails clacking against the keyboard. She frowned slightly, then typed again. "I am sorry, Ms. Brooks," she said, her brow furrowing. "I see Otis and Verna Brooks, but I am showing that the 3rd seat in this reservation was modified early this morning. The name on the ticket is Tanisha Brooks." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That is impossible," I said, leaning over the counter. "I booked these tickets months ago. I paid for them. There must be a mistake." Before the agent could answer, Verna stepped up beside me. She moved with a speed I had not seen in years, snatching my passport off the counter before I could even react. "There is no mistake," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She smiled at the agent, then turned that cold, dead smile onto me. "Nia, you are not going." I stared at her, my brain unable to process the words. "What are you talking about?" "We handled it," Verna said, tucking my passport into her purse, as if she were confiscating a toy from a child. "Your father called the airline at 3 in the morning. He had all your security questions and your social security number from that time you helped us refinance the house. He pretended to be your assistant. He transferred your ticket to Tanisha." My mouth fell open. "You stole my identity. You impersonated me to steal a $10,000 plane ticket. We did not steal anything." Verna snapped, her voice dropping to a hiss. "We reallocated resources. Tanisha needs this. You are always flying off to somewhere fancy. When was the last time your sister left Queens?" "Never." Brad lumbered up to the counter, slamming his backpack down next to my Louis Vuitton bag. "Yeah, and do not worry about me, Nia," he said, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I bought my own ticket. Economy. But Verna said she has your frequent flyer login, so she is going to bump me up to sit with them. We are going to party the whole way there." I looked at the agent, who was watching this exchange with wide eyes, her hand hovering over the phone. I looked at my mother, who was looking at me with a mixture of defiance and entitlement. They had not just planned a vacation, they had planned a coup. They had spent the night digging through my personal data, hacking my accounts, and erasing me from my own trip. "You cannot do this," I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "That is my seat. Those are my miles. It is family money." Nia, Otis grunted from behind the luggage cart. "Stop being stingy. Go home and work. We will send you a postcard." Verna turned back to the agent, her smile returning instantly. "We are ready to check in now, just the 4 of us, and please process that upgrade for my future son-in-law immediately. My daughter pays for everything." I stood in the middle of the bustling terminal, feeling the blood pounding in my ears. The air conditioning was freezing, but I felt like I was burning up from the inside out. People were staring at us. Travelers wheeling suitcases swerved to avoid the scene we were causing, but I did not care. I looked from my mother to my father, unable to comprehend the level of entitlement staring back at me. "You stole my identity," I said, my voice tight with suppressed rage. "You called the airline and pretended to be me. That is fraud, Mom. That is a federal crime." Verna stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her perfume was overwhelming, a cloying floral scent that I usually associated with Sunday church, but now smelled like betrayal. "Stop being so dramatic, Nia," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Nobody stole anything. We are family. What is yours is ours. That is how this family works. Besides, look at your sister." She gestured toward Tanisha, who was busy taking a selfie with her stolen boarding pass, pouting her lips for the camera. "Tanisha has been unemployed for 2 years. Do you know how hard that is on her mental health? She is stressed, Nia. She is fragile. She has been depressed for months trying to figure out her life path. She needs this break to find herself again. She needs to exhale." I let out a harsh laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Find herself?" I asked incredulously. "She is finding herself in my first-class seat, drinking champagne that I paid for. I work 80-hour weeks, Mom. I handle crises that would make your head spin. When do I get to exhale? When is it my turn to be fragile?" Verna waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, please. You travel all the time for work. You were in London last month. You were in Tokyo before that. You live a glamorous life, hopping from continent to continent while your sister struggles here in Queens. You see the world on the company dime. Would it kill you to share just once? Would it kill you to step aside and let your baby sister have one nice memory? You are so greedy, Nia. It is unbecoming." Otis lumbered forward, crossing his thick arms over his chest. He looked at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and expectation that I had spent my entire life trying to erase. "Your mother is right, Nia," he grumbled, his voice deep and rumbling. "You are making a scene over pocket change. You make more in a month than I made in a year at the plant. You are rich. What is $20,000 to you, really? Just numbers on a screen. You have a penthouse. You have a fancy car. Why do you need to take this trip away from them?" I stared at him. "It was my trip, Dad. I planned it. I paid for it. It was for us. Consider it an early wedding gift," Otis said, shrugging his shoulders. He nodded toward Brad, who was standing there, scratching his stomach and looking bored. "They are getting married soon. They need a honeymoon. They cannot afford something like this. You can. You should be happy to provide that for them instead of standing here counting pennies like a miser. Success has made you hard, Nia. You have forgotten where you come from. We raised you better than this." I could not listen to this anymore. My father was justifying theft with guilt trips, and my mother was clutching my passport like it was a prize she had won at a carnival. The sheer injustice of it made my vision blur. That folder contained my identity, my credit cards, and the confirmation numbers for $20,000 worth of bookings. It was mine. I stepped toward Verna. I did not scream. I did not shout. I simply reached out my hand to take back what belonged to me. "Give me the folder, Mom," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Verna stumbled back, clutching the leather folio to her chest like a victim in a melodrama. "Help!" she cried out, her eyes darting around the terminal for an audience. "She is attacking me." I ignored her theatrics and reached again. That is when Brad moved. He stepped between us, a wall of unwashed flannel and entitlement. He did not just block me. He planted his hand squarely on my shoulder and shoved. It was not a gentle push. He put his full weight into it. I was wearing 4-inch stiletto heels, not running shoes. My balance betrayed me. I stumbled backward, my arms windmilling as I tried to find purchase on the slick airport floor. I landed hard on my hip, the impact jarring my teeth. My purse spilled open, scattering lipstick and business cards across the dirty tiles. I gasped, the air knocked out of my lungs. I looked up to see Brad looming over me, dusting off his hands as if he had just taken out the trash. "Do not be so selfish, Nia," He sneered, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. You are the older sister. Act like it. You are rich. Let your family have this. You are pathetic. I tried to push myself up, my hip throbbing, but a flash of light blinded me. I blinked and saw Tanisha standing over me. She was not helping me up. She was holding her iPhone steadily, the ring light reflecting in her sunglasses. She was live streaming. "Oh my God, you guys," Tanisha said to her phone, her voice dripping with fake concern that barely masked her glee. "Look at this. My big sister, the famous crisis manager Nia Brooks, is literally attacking our parents at JFK. She is so jealous that we are going on vacation. Look at her on the floor. She is acting like a total thug." "Put the phone down, Tanisha," I warned, my voice shaking. She just zoomed in. "This is the real Nia Brooks, y'all. She wears Prada, but she acts like she belongs in a cage. So embarrassing." Before I could stand, shadows fell over me. 2 TSA agents and a Port Authority police officer broke through the circle of onlookers. "Step back," the officer commanded, his hand resting near his belt. What is going on here? I opened my mouth to explain that I had been assaulted and robbed, but Verna got there first. She burst into tears, instant and voluminous. "Officer, thank God you are here," she wailed, clinging to Otis. "It is my daughter. She is having some kind of mental breakdown. We tried to calm her down, but she lunged at me. She tried to hit me because I would not give her money." The officer looked down at me. I was on the floor, disheveled, surrounded by spilled makeup. My mother was crying in my father's arms. My sister was filming. Brad was standing there looking like a protective hero. "Ma'am," the officer said to me, his voice hard. "You need to get up slowly. You are causing a disturbance." "Disturbance," I choked out. He pushed me. "They stole my ticket." Otis shook his head sadly, playing the part of the weary father perfectly. "She is confused, officer. She has been working too hard. We just want to get on our flight. Please just keep her away from us so we can leave safely." The officer grabbed my arm and hauled me to my feet. His grip was tight. "Mom, you need to walk away right now, or I am going to detain you for disorderly conduct. Do not make a scene." I looked at my family. They were huddled together behind the wall of security, looking at me with triumph. They had won. They had humiliated me, physically assaulted me, and convinced the police I was the aggressor. "Fine," I whispered, pulling my arm from the officer's grip. "I am leaving." Tanisha blew me a kiss as the officer steered me toward the exit. "Bye, sis," she called out. "Don't work too hard." I turned my back on them. My hip was on fire, but my mind was ice cold. They wanted me to walk away, so I would, but they had no idea what I was walking toward. I looked at the officer. His hand was resting near his belt, and his face was set in stone. He was waiting for a reason to put me in cuffs. I knew the optics. I was a professional crisis manager. I knew exactly how this looked. An angry black woman screaming at her elderly parents, and a crying sister in the middle of JFK. I would lose this fight. I would lose my reputation. I would lose my career. I took a deep breath and forced my hands to unclench. I stepped back. "I am leaving," I said, my voice flat. I raised my hand slightly to show I was surrendering. The officer relaxed his stance, but he did not move. He watched me like I was a threat. I looked past him. My family was moving toward the TSA pre-check lane, my lane, the lane I paid for. They looked like a parade. Otis was pushing the cart with a spring in his step I had not seen in years. Brad had his arm around Tanisha, whispering something that made her giggle. Tanisha paused before she entered the queue. She looked back at me. She waved her fingers, a little pageant wave. She mouthed the word bye. She looked so happy. She looked like she had just won the lottery. In a way, she had. Verna was the last one. She stopped right before the document checker. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and turned around. She shouted across the distance. Her voice carried over the heads of the other passengers, loud and demanding. "Nia, go straight to the house. Do not go back to your apartment. You need to water the plants and feed the cat. We will be gone for 2 weeks. She paused, making sure I was listening. Then she delivered the final blow. And check your email. I took the black card from your desk. The limit is getting low. Transfer another 5,000. We want to do some shopping in Milan. Do not be cheap. She did not wait for an answer. She turned around and handed my passport to the agent. The agent scanned it. The light turned green. She walked through. They all walked through. They disappeared behind the frosted glass of the security checkpoint. They were gone. They had taken my vacation. They had taken my dignity. They had taken my identity. And they left me standing there with a bruised hip and a ruined blazer. I was not their daughter. I was not their sister. I was their servant. I was their ATM. I turned around and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors opened to the cold New York air. I walked to my car. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. Verna wanted me to transfer money. She wanted me to watch the house. I would do exactly what she asked. I would go to the house, and I would take care of everything, just not the way she expected. I sat in the driver's seat of my Range Rover, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My hip throbbed where I had hit the concrete, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fire burning in my chest. I was shaking not from cold, but from a rage so pure it felt like poison in my veins. I stared at the dashboard clock. They would be boarding soon. They would be settling into the wide leather seats of first class, sipping pre-flight mimosas, laughing about how they had played me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up with a notification from American Express. I picked it up, dread coiling in my stomach. Transaction alert. $12,400. Emirates Airlines. Upgrade fees. I stared at the numbers. $12,000. That was the limit on the supplementary platinum card I had given Verna years ago. I gave it to her for emergencies, for medicine, for house repairs. She had just used it to upgrade Brad, the man who pushed me onto the ground, to a lie-flat bed for a 7-hour flight. She had maxed it out in a single swipe. I dialed the number on the back of my own card. My finger hovered over the keypad for a split second. This was it. The moment of no return. If I did this, there was no going back to family dinners or pretending everything was fine. This was war. I pressed call. Thank you for calling American Express Platinum Concierge. A smooth voice answered. This is David. How can I assist you today, Ms. Brooks? Hi, David, I said. My voice was calm. It sounded terrifyingly calm even to me. I need to inquire about a recent charge on the supplementary card ending in 4098. One moment, please. I heard the clicking of keys. Yes, I see a charge pending for $12,400 to Emirates Airlines. It appears to be for seat upgrades. Was this authorized? I looked out the windshield at the gray sky over JFK. I imagined Tanisha taking a selfie with a glass of champagne. I imagined Verna reclining her seat. No, David, I said. It was not authorized. That card was stolen. I heard David's breath hitch slightly. Oh, I am very sorry to hear that, Ms. Brooks. We can initiate a fraud investigation immediately. Do it, I said. But David, I need you to do something else for me. I need you to report all cards associated with this account as lost or stolen. The primary, the secondaries, everything. I want a total freeze on all assets linked to my social security number. Certainly, we can put a total lock on the account immediately. This will decline any future transactions starting right now. Right now, I repeated. The plane was scheduled to take off in 40 minutes. The upgrade charge was already pending, so they would get their flight. They would get to Rome. But the second they landed, the second they tried to buy a bottle of water or pay for a taxi, that piece of plastic would be nothing more than a bookmark. Do it, I commanded. Burn it all down. Consider it done, Ms. Brooks, David said. Your accounts are frozen. Is there anything else? No, I said. That will be all. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I watched a plane climb into the sky in the distance. Have a safe flight, Mom, I whispered to the empty car. Enjoy the champagne. Because when you land, the party is over. I drove back to my parents' house in Queens, the familiar route feeling alien now. They had commanded me to water their plants and feed their cat, treating me like the hired help they could not afford. I parked in the driveway, staring up at the brick facade of the home I had paid off for them. It looked innocent enough, a standard suburban house with a manicured lawn, but inside, I knew it was a monument to their favoritism. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence. The house smelled stale, like old potpourri and neglect. I walked past the living room where family photos were displayed on the mantel. My graduation photo from law school was shoved to the back, obscured by a large frame picture of Tanisha winning a beauty pageant in high school. I ignored it and headed upstairs to my old bedroom. I needed a moment to breathe, to find some anchor in this storm of betrayal. I opened the door to my room, expecting to see my twin bed, my old desk, maybe even some of my childhood books. Instead, I was met with a wall of cardboard boxes and clothing racks. My room was gone. It had been transformed into a chaotic storage unit. Cheap polyester dresses hung on rolling racks tagged with prices for Tanisha's failed online boutique. Boxes of knockoff handbags were stacked to the ceiling, blocking the window. My desk was buried under piles of shipping labels and packing tape. My bed was dismantled and leaned against the wall, covered in dust. They had erased me. They had not just taken my vacation. They had taken my space in their home. I felt a hot prickle of tears behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. Sadness was a luxury I could not afford right now. Rage was better. Rage was fuel. I kicked a box of fake sunglasses out of my way and stormed out of the room. I went to my parents' bedroom. I needed to check on my things. Years ago, I had entrusted them with a small fireproof safe containing my most important documents. My birth certificate, the deed to my car, and a stack of savings bonds my grandmother had left me. I had thought they would be safe here in the house where I grew up. I opened their closet door and knelt down. The spot where the safe usually sat was empty. Panic flared in my chest, cold and sharp. I rummaged through the closet floor, pushing aside shoeboxes and piles of clothes. Nothing. I stood up and began tearing through the room. I checked under the bed, in the dresser drawers, in the bathroom cabinet. The safe was gone. I stood in the center of their bedroom, breathing hard. They had taken it. They had not just stolen a plane ticket, they had stolen my security. I looked around the room, my eyes landing on the nightstand. There, tucked under a lamp, was a piece of paper. I walked over and picked it up. It was a receipt from a pawn shop on Jamaica Avenue. I read the itemized list, my hands shaking. Gold necklace, diamond earrings, savings bonds, cash payout $50,000. Date, yesterday. I stared at the paper, the numbers blurring. They had pawned my grandmother's jewelry. They had cashed out my bonds. They had liquidated my past to fund their future. This was not just toxic family behavior. This was theft. This was a crime. And they had done it while smiling to my face, while telling me I was selfish. I crumpled the receipt in my fist. The last shred of guilt I felt about canceling their credit cards evaporated. They had declared war on me. And I was going to win. I walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open. I did not care about their plants. I did not care about their cat. I cared about justice, and I knew exactly how to get it. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had hoped never to use. It was time to call my lawyer. I fell to my knees on the floor of the master closet, shoving aside piles of Tanisha's unsold inventory boxes and old coats. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew the safe had to be here. I had bought it for them 5 years ago, a heavy fireproof steel box meant to protect the family legacy. I finally found it, pushed all the way to the back corner, hidden under a pile of dirty laundry. It looked undisturbed, but I knew better. I reached for the digital keypad, my fingers hovering over the buttons. I did not even have to think about the combination. It was 08121995. Tanisha's birthday, naturally. Even the code to protect my assets was dedicated to her. The light on the panel turned green with a cheerful beep that sounded like a mockery in the silent house. I pulled the heavy handle, and the door swung open. I expected to see the thick manila envelopes I had carefully organized years ago. Instead, I was staring into a black metal void. It was empty. I reached inside my hand, sweeping across the cold felt lining, desperate to find anything. Where was the trust fund passbook? My grandmother had left me that account, a savings trust meant to be a down payment on my own home one day. It had over $40,000 in it. Where was the pink slip to my car, the one I let my father drive to church on Sundays? Where was the velvet pouch containing the antique diamond brooch and the string of pearls that had been in our family since the 1920s? The jewelry was not just valuable, it was my history. It was the only thing I had left of the grandmother who actually loved me. Gone. All of it. Then I saw it. A single slip of thin thermal paper fluttered in the back corner of the safe. I picked it up, my hands trembling so hard the paper rattled. It was a transaction receipt from EZ Cash Pawn on Jamaica Avenue. The date was from 2 days ago. I read the itemized list and the air left my lungs. Vintage jewelry collection, government savings bonds, vehicle title transfer. I looked at the bottom of the receipt. Total cash payout $50,000. I sat back on my heels, staring at the slip of paper. The room spun. They had not just taken my credit cards. They had liquidated my life. They had taken the only inheritance I had, the only financial safety net I had built for myself, and they had sold it for pennies on the dollar. They had pawned my grandmother's legacy to fund a shopping spree in Milan. They stripped me of my past to pay for their 2 weeks of luxury. A cold realization settled over me. This was not just a family dispute. This was a calculated dismantling of my financial existence. They smiled in my face at dinner 3 nights ago, knowing they had already sold my jewelry. They hugged me, knowing they had cashed out my bonds. They looked at me with love while they were robbing me blind. The betrayal was so absolute it felt physical, like a knife twisting in my gut. But then the pain shifted. It hardened. It turned into something cold and sharp and useful. I folded the receipt carefully and put it in my pocket. This was not just a piece of paper, it was evidence, and I was going to use it. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. There were no tears. I had cried enough over these people. I had cried when they forgot my graduation. I had cried when they borrowed money and never paid it back. I had cried when they made me feel like an outsider in my own family. But looking at that empty safe, I realized something. You do not cry over parasites. You remove them. I pulled out my phone. My hand was steady now. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Arthur Brooks. He was not just my lawyer, he was the best criminal defense attorney in New York City. He was expensive, ruthless, and he owed me a favor for saving his reputation during a PR scandal last year. Arthur picked up on the second ring. Nia. This is a surprise. I thought you were on your way to Rome. Change of plans, Arthur. I said, my voice ice cold. I need you to open a file immediately. I am looking at a felony theft case. Grand larceny, identity theft, fraud. Arthur paused. That sounds serious. Who is the client? I am, I said. The perpetrators are Otis Brooks, Verna Brooks, and Tanisha Brooks, my parents and my sister. There was a long silence on the other end. Nia, are you sure about this? Once we start this process, there is no going back. These are serious charges. I am looking at an empty safe. Arthur, I said, walking out of the closet. They stole $50,000 worth of assets. They stole my identity to change a plane ticket. They are currently flying to Rome on a stolen credit card. I want them arrested. I want them prosecuted. And most of all, Arthur, I want them deported. I could hear Arthur typing furiously in the background. Okay, Nia. I am on it. We can file a police report immediately for the theft. As for the credit card fraud, we can flag that with the airline and the Italian authorities. If we time this right, we can have them detained at customs in Rome. That is exactly what I want, I said. I want you to contact the U.S. consulate in Rome. Tell them that 3 U.S. citizens are traveling on fraudulent documents and stolen funds. I want their passports flagged. I want them to be met by the carabinieri the second they step off that plane. Consider it done, Arthur said, his voice taking on a professional edge. I will also contact a private investigator to track their movements in Rome, just in case they slip through customs. We will make sure they have nowhere to go. Good, I said. And Arthur, I want to start eviction proceedings on this house. It is in my name. I want them out. I will have the paperwork drawn up by morning, Arthur said. Nia, are you okay? I looked around the bedroom that had been my childhood sanctuary, now defiled by greed and neglect. I looked at the empty spot where the safe used to be. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I am better than okay, Arthur, I said. I am finally cleaning house. I hung up the phone. I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs. I did not look back. I had a war to win. And the first battle was going to take place in Rome. They wanted a vacation. I was going to give them an eviction notice. They wanted luxury. I was going to give them a jail cell. They had taken everything from me. Now I was going to take everything from them, starting with their freedom. While I was standing in the ruins of my childhood bedroom, filing police reports, my family was soaring through the stratosphere, wrapped in cashmere blankets and entitlement. In the first-class cabin of the Emirates flight to Rome, the champagne was flowing like water. Tanisha had already turned her pod into a photo studio. She reclined her leather seat all the way back, posing with a glass of Dom Perignon, her lips pursed in a perfect duck face. She snapped photo after photo, applying filters to hide the fact that she was wearing a tracksuit she bought at a discount store. She posted them instantly to her story with captions like, "Living my best life," and CEO energy, pretending she was the one who had earned this luxury. Brad sat next to her, looking entirely out of place. He had already unbuttoned his flannel shirt, revealing a stained undershirt, and was loudly demanding another refill from the flight attendant. He had his muddy boots propped up on the pristine footrest, treating a $10,000 seat like a recliner in a frat house. He was laughing a loud grating sound, bragging to anyone who would listen about how he was going to buy a Rolex the second they landed. A few rows back, Otis and Verna were huddled together, whispering conspiratorially, like thieves counting their loot. Verna had the in-flight magazine open on her lap, circling items in the duty-free catalog with a greedy intensity. She was fantasizing about the shopping spree she was planning for Rome. She talked about buying leather gloves for herself and a new suit for Otis, all charged to the black card she believed was resting safely in her purse. She had no idea that the card was already dead. She did not know that the magnetic strip was useless, the chip deactivated, and the account flagged for gross fraud. Otis was nodding along, dreaming of Italian dinners and expensive wine, completely oblivious to the fact that his retirement plan, which was me, had finally cut the cord. They were high on the thrill of the heist. They clinked their glasses, toasting to their own cleverness. They thought they had pulled off the perfect crime. They thought Nia was back in Queens, crying in her empty apartment, powerless to stop them. They felt untouchable, suspended in the sky where no consequences could reach them. They did not know that the signal had already been sent. They did not know that while they were eating caviar and watching movies, a notification was flashing on a computer screen at Interpol. They did not know that the Italian carabinieri had already received a flagged passport alert. They were flying toward a vacation, but they were landing in a trap. The higher they flew, the harder they were going to fall. And I was the one who had cut the parachute. The plane touched down at Fiumicino Airport, with a smooth bump that Verna took as a sign of good fortune. She gathered her carry-on bag, adjusting her hat, and smoothing her dress, ready to make her grand entrance into Italy. Tanisha was practically bouncing in her seat, already checking her phone for service so she could post her arrival selfie. Brad was groggy and hungover, stumbling out of his pod, while Otis checked his pockets to make sure he had not lost his passport. They disembarked with the swagger of royalty, bypassing the long lines of economy passengers and heading straight for customs. They breezed through thanks to the priority status that came with the first-class tickets. They collected their mountain of luggage from the carousel, laughing and joking about how easy travel was when you had money. They walked out of the baggage claim area and into the arrivals hall, expecting to see a chauffeur holding a sign with their names. They stood there scanning the crowd of drivers. They looked for the black suit, the polished shoes, the sleek tablet displaying Brooks Family VIP, but there was no sign. There was no driver. There was no limousine. They waited for 10 minutes, then 20. Verna started tapping her foot impatiently. "Where are they?" she muttered. "Nia said she booked the Platinum Concierge service. They should be here." Otis looked around nervously. "Maybe they are running late." Tanisha rolled her eyes. "This is so unprofessional. I am going to leave a bad review." Brad leaned against a pillar, lighting a cigarette right under a no-smoking sign. "Maybe Nia messed up," he grunted. "She probably cheaped out and booked some discount service." After 30 minutes of waiting, Verna marched over to the information desk. She slammed her hand down on the counter. "Where is the driver for the Brooks party?" she demanded. "We booked the VIP transfer." The agent looked up, unimpressed. "Mom, do you have a confirmation number?" Verna dug through her purse and pulled out the crumpled itinerary she had stolen from Nia. She read off the number. The agent typed it into his computer. "I am sorry, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "That reservation was cancelled yesterday." "Cancelled?" Verna shrieked. "That is impossible. My daughter paid for it." The agent shrugged. "It was cancelled by the cardholder. There is no car coming for you." Verna stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Otis looked pale. "What do we do now?" he whispered. "We have 8 suitcases, Otis. We cannot take the train." Tanisha let out a dramatic groan. "This is a disaster. My feet hurt. I am not walking." They had no choice. They dragged their 8 massive suitcases out of the terminal and into the chaotic heat of the taxi stand. The official taxi line was long and organized, but Brad insisted he knew a guy. He flagged down a beat-up van with a handwritten taxi sign taped to the window. The driver, a burly man with a thick accent, quoted them €200 for the ride to the city. It was robbery, plain and simple, but they were desperate. They loaded the bags themselves, sweating and cursing. Brad threw his backpack in last, grumbling the whole time. "This is Nia's fault," he spat. "She probably did this on purpose just to spite us. She is so petty. She cannot stand to see us happy." They piled into the cramped van, the smell of stale cigarettes and old upholstery filling their noses. As the van lurched forward into Roman traffic, their dream vacation was already starting to crumble. And they had not even reached the hotel yet. The taxi pulled away, leaving them standing on the cobblestones in front of the Hotel de la Ville. It was a palace of white marble and gold leaf, sitting atop the Spanish steps like a crown jewel of Rome. Doormen in pristine uniforms rushed to take their bags, but Verna waved them off, clutching her purse tightly. She walked into the lobby with her head held high, acting as if she owned the place. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. Tanisha immediately started spinning in circles, recording a video for her followers, shouting about how she had finally arrived in paradise. Brad slumped onto a velvet sofa, putting his dirty boots up on a coffee table that probably cost more than his entire life earnings. Verna marched up to the reception desk, slamming her hand down on the polished mahogany. "Checking in," she announced. "The name is Brooks. We have the presidential suite and the adjoining rooms." The concierge, a man with impeccable posture and a suit that cost more than Verna's car, looked up. He typed into his computer, his expression unreadable. "Ah, yes. The Brooks reservation." He stopped typing and looked at Verna over the rim of his glasses. "I am afraid there is a problem, madame. The credit card on file has been declined. The reservation was automatically cancelled this morning due to non-payment." Verna laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "That is ridiculous," she scoffed. "My daughter booked this. She is a millionaire. Run it again." I have run it 3 times. Madame the concierge said, his voice dropping a few degrees in temperature. The card is invalid. However, we do have the rooms available if you wish to rebook them. But I must inform you that the promotional rate your daughter secured is no longer valid. The current rack rate for a 2-week stay in our premium suites is €25,000, plus taxes and a €5,000 security deposit. Payment is due immediately. 25,000. Otis choked out, his eyes bulging. That is $30,000. Verna waved him into silence. Do not worry, Otis. I have the card. She dug into her purse and pulled out the heavy black metal American Express card she had stolen from my desk. It gleamed under the chandeliers. She slapped it onto the counter with a smirk. Here, put it on this, and send up some caviar. We are starving. The concierge took the card with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. He inserted it into the chip reader. The machine whirred for a second, then let out a harsh, angry beep. The screen flashed red. Declined. Try it again. Verna snapped, her smile faltering. It is a platinum card. It has no limit. The concierge tried again. Another beep. Another red flash. He looked at the screen and then at Verna, his expression hardening. Madame, the issuer indicates this card has been reported lost or stolen. It has been deactivated. Verna went pale. That is a lie, she shrieked. My daughter gave me this card. It works. It has to work. It does not work, Madame the concierge said, sliding the useless piece of metal back across the counter. Do you have another form of payment? Otis stepped forward, his hands shaking. He pulled out his own wallet, a tattered leather thing bursting with receipts. He pulled out his debit card from the credit union, and a credit card he had not used in 5 years. Try these, he pleaded, pushing them toward the man. The concierge ran Otis' debit card. Insufficient funds. He ran the credit card. Declined. The silence in the lobby was deafening. Guests were staring. Security guards were inching closer. Tanisha had stopped filming. Brad had stood up from the couch looking like a rat sensing a sinking ship. I am sorry, the concierge said, his voice icy cold. Without payment, I cannot give you room keys. You will need to leave the premises immediately. You are blocking the desk for paying guests. Verna looked at the card in her hand, then at Otis, then at the mountain of luggage. The realization hit her like a physical blow. They were in Rome. They had 8 suitcases, and they did not have a single dollar to their names. The concierge did not wait for an explanation. He snapped his fingers, and 2 security guards materialized from the corners of the lobby. They were not the friendly TSA agents from JFK. These men were Roman statues come to life, broad-shouldered and unsmiling. They stepped forward, flanking my family like they were extracting a virus from a clean room. Please leave the premises immediately, the concierge said, his voice cutting through Verna's sputtering protests. If you do not vacate the lobby, I will call the carabinieri. You are disturbing our guests. Verna tried to argue. She tried to pull the "Do you know who I am" card, but the guards were already moving them. They did not touch them, but they used their bodies to herd them toward the revolving doors. Otis grabbed 2 suitcases, his face burning with shame. Brad kicked his duffel bag along the marble floor, cursing under his breath about Italian hospitality. Tanisha was too shocked to speak, her phone clutching in her hand like a talisman that had lost its magic. They were pushed out onto the cobblestone street. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, sealing in the warmth and the smell of lilies, sealing out the riffraff. They stood on the sidewalk surrounded by their mountain of luggage, looking like refugees from a fashion show gone wrong. And then the sky opened up. It started as a few heavy drops splattering against the pavement like warning shots. Within seconds, it turned into a torrential downpour. Cold Roman rain lashed down from the gray sky, soaking them instantly. Verna's wide-brimmed hat, which she had worn to look like a movie star, began to sag and droop, water dripping from the brim onto her nose. Tanisha's velour tracksuit acted like a sponge absorbing the water until it hung heavy and shapeless on her frame. My hair. Tanisha shrieked, covering her head with her hands. My blowout. Mom, do something. Verna was frantically trying to cover her leather purse with her jacket, but the rain was relentless. Call her, she yelled over the sound of the downpour. Call Nia. Tell her to fix this right now. Tell her I am going to sue her. Tanisha fumbled with her phone, her wet fingers slipping on the screen. She pulled up my contact. I can imagine the rage in her eyes, the entitlement burning brighter than the streetlights. She hit the call button, expecting to hear my voice, expecting to scream at me, until I caved, until I apologized and wired them thousands of dollars. The phone rang once, then a sharp click, then silence. She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it. She dialed again, straight to voicemail. She tried FaceTime. It failed instantly. She opened her text messages and typed a furious string of insults. Failed to deliver. She blocked me. Tanisha screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She blocked me, Mom. She blocked my number. Verna grabbed the phone from her hands, water streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Let me try. She dialed my number. The result was the same. The line was dead. The connection was severed. She cut us off. Tanisha wailed, stomping her foot in a puddle. She knows. She did this on purpose. She left us here. They stood there huddled together in the rain, a miserable, soaking wet clump of entitlement. The water was seeping into their suitcases, ruining the clothes they had packed for their grand tour. People with umbrellas hurried past them, looking at the screaming Americans with disdain. They were alone in a foreign city with no hotel, no ride, and no way to reach the one person who had always saved them. The reality of their situation washed over them cold and unforgiving. They were homeless in Rome. They dragged their soaking wet luggage through the cobblestone alleys of Rome. The luxury dream was over. Brad found the place on his phone, a 2-star hostel near the train station called Pensione Luigi. It was not the Hotel de la Ville. It was a hole in the wall, sandwiched between a kebab shop and a laundromat. The neon sign outside buzzed with a dying flicker, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. Otis pulled out the envelope of cash he had hidden in the inside pocket of his jacket. It was the money from the pawn shop, the $50,000 they had stolen from my safe. It pained him to touch it. That money was supposed to be for designer suits and leather bags, not for a room that smelled like boiled cabbage and bleach. He peeled off €300 and handed it to the clerk, a man with a grease-stained shirt who looked at them with open suspicion. No refunds, the clerk grunted, sliding a heavy brass key across the scratched counter. Checkout is at 10 sharp. They hauled the 8 massive suitcases up 3 flights of narrow stairs because the elevator was broken. The wheels clattered against the stone steps, echoing like gunshots in the stairwell. By the time they reached the 3rd floor, they were panting and sweating, their expensive clothes clinging to their bodies. Otis fumbled with the lock and pushed the door open. The room was a shock. It was tiny, linoleum floors peeling at the corners. 4 narrow metal cots crammed against the walls with thin gray blankets that looked like they had been stolen from a prison. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows. And the worst part was the lack of facilities. There was no bathroom, just a porcelain sink in the corner that dripped a steady, rhythmic torture. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with the other 12 rooms on the floor. Verna collapsed onto one of the cots, the springs screeching in protest. She looked around the dingy room, her wet designer hat sliding off her head and onto the dirty floor. She did not look at the mold in the corners or the water stains on the ceiling. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink, and then she started to wail. It was a low mourning sound at first, then it escalated into full-blown hysterics. She rocked back and forth, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Why is she doing this to us? Verna sobbed, her voice echoing off the thin walls. Why is Nia so cruel? She knows I have high blood pressure. She knows your father has a bad back. Does she want to kill us? Is that it? She wants to murder her own parents in a foreign country. She stranded us here like dogs. She planned this, Otis. She wants us to die in this gutter. Tanisha was standing by the window trying to get a signal on her phone. She looked out at the alleyway where a stray cat was picking through a trash can. She turned back to the room, her face twisted in disgust. I cannot stay here, Mom, she whined, kicking the metal leg of the cot. It smells like feet. I'm going to get a disease. Nia is a monster. She is jealous because I'm getting married and she is alone. That is the only reason. She wants to ruin my happiness because she is miserable. Verna wiped her eyes with a wet tissue, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She is evil, Verna spat. We raised her, we fed her, and this is how she repays us, by locking our cards, by stealing our vacation. She is punishing us for loving you, Tanisha. She hates that we chose you. Well, I have news for her. When we get back, I am writing her out of the will. She will not get a dime. She thinks she can break us, but she is wrong. We are the victims here. While my family was busy turning on each other in a Roman flophouse, I was sitting in the climate-controlled executive suite of First National Bank in downtown Manhattan. The air smelled of money and floor wax. I was wearing a sharp navy suit that screamed business, and next to me sat Arthur Brooks looking like a shark who had just smelled blood in the water. We were sitting across from Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, who looked increasingly pale as he reviewed the documents spread across his mahogany desk. I need you to look at this, I said, sliding an iPad across the polished wood surface. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and looked at the screen. I pressed play. The video was black and white, but the resolution was crystal clear. It showed the master bedroom of my parents' house in Queens. I had installed the hidden camera inside the smoke detector 3 years ago, not because I wanted to spy on them, but because I knew deep down that a day like this would come. I knew that their entitlement would eventually cross the line into criminality. On the screen, my mother Verna walked into the frame, followed by Tanisha. The timestamp read 2 days ago. Verna pointed to the closet. Tanisha went in and dragged out the heavy steel safe. They did not even struggle with the combination. They typed in Tanisha's birthday, laughing as the light turned green. Mr. Henderson watched in silence as my mother and sister looted my life. He watched Tanisha pull out the savings bonds and do a little victory dance. He watched Verna stuff my grandmother's vintage jewelry into her purse. He watched them rifle through the deed to my car and the paperwork for the house. This is my mother's house, correct? Mr. Henderson asked, his voice tight. Technically, yes, Arthur interjected, leaning forward. However, the mortgage is under Ms. Brooks' name as a guarantor. And the assets they are stealing in this video were held in trust. What you are watching is grand larceny and conspiracy to commit fraud. And since they used the proceeds from this theft to pay down a portion of their credit card debt held by this bank, they have involved you in money laundering, Mr. Henderson pulled at his collar. This is extremely serious. It gets worse, I said. My father, Otis Brooks, is a co-signer on several of these accounts. He was waiting in the car during this theft, which makes him an accessory. They are currently in Italy spending stolen funds. I want to report this formally, but more importantly, I want to trigger the fraud clause in the mortgage agreement. Mr. Henderson typed furiously into his computer. I see here that there have been several large cash deposits recently followed by immediate international spending attempts. Given the video evidence and the police report you filed this morning, we have grounds to suspect that the collateral for the home loan is compromised. Freeze it all, Arthur commanded. Freeze their checking accounts. Freeze their savings. Freeze the line of credit attached to the house. If they try to buy so much as a stick of gum, I want it declined. We need a full forensic audit of where that stolen money went, Mr. Henderson hit the enter key with a definitive click. It is done. All accounts associated with Otis and Verna Brooks have been locked pending a fraud investigation. They have zero access to funds. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I walked out of the bank into the bright New York sunlight. I checked my watch. It was dinner time in Rome. They would be hungry soon. And now, thanks to a camera they never knew existed, They were not just broke. They were completely frozen out of the financial system. The trap was not just shut, it was welded tight. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk of my Manhattan office. I looked at the screen and saw a number with an Italian country code. I knew exactly who it was. They had reached the breaking point. It was 2 a.m. in Rome, which meant they were likely huddled in the lobby of some dingy pension, desperate and furious. I sat back in my leather chair and looked across the desk at Arthur, my lawyer. He nodded, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad. I pressed the answer button and immediately hit the speaker icon. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm and professional. "Nia, you evil witch." Tanisha's voice exploded from the phone, distorted by rage and a bad connection. "You are trying to kill us. Do you hear me? You ruined everything. We are in a hostel, Nia. A hostel. There are cockroaches. There is a communal bathroom. Mom is crying. Brad is gone. We have no money. How could you do this to us?" I took a slow sip of the sparkling water on my desk, savoring the bubbles. Arthur was already writing, documenting the time and the verbal abuse. "I am confused, Tanisha," I said, keeping my tone light. "I thought you needed a break. Mom said you were so stressed from planning your wedding. I figured a rustic experience would be grounding for you. A chance to really connect with the local culture instead of hiding in a 5-star hotel. It is a growth opportunity." "Growth opportunity," Tanisha shrieked, her voice cracked. "You cut the cards, Nia! You reported them stolen!" The concierge looked at us like we were trash. "They threw our bags on the street in the rain. You humiliated us. Fix this right now. Unlock the cards. Wire us $10,000 or I swear to God when I get home, I will destroy you." Arthur raised an eyebrow. That was a threat. I leaned closer to the phone. "You want to talk about destruction, Tanisha? Let us talk about my safe." There was a sudden heavy silence on the line. The screaming stopped instantly. I could hear Tanisha's breathing, ragged and panicked. I went to the house, I continued, my voice hardening into steel. I saw my room. I saw the empty closet. And I found the receipt from the pawn shop on Jamaica Avenue. "Nia, wait," Tanisha stammered, her bravado evaporating. We were just borrowing it. We were going to buy it back." "You stole $50,000 worth of bonds and heirlooms," I said. "You stole Grandma's necklace. That is not borrowing. That is grand larceny. And I want you to know something before you hang up. I did not just cancel the credit cards. I went to the precinct this morning. I filed a police report." "No," Tanisha whispered. "You wouldn't. Mom is with me. I filed it against all of you," I said. "The detectives have the security footage from the bedroom. They have the pawn shop receipt. So enjoy your time in Rome, sis. Really soak it in. Because when you land at JFK, there will be officers waiting to escort you to a cell." "You are a monster," Tanisha sobbed. "No," I said. "I am just the bank. And the bank is closed." I tapped the red button and ended the call. The silence in the office was beautiful. I looked at Arthur. He closed his notebook with a satisfied snap. "That went well," he said. I looked out the window at the city lights. It was the best conversation I had with my sister in years. Back in the suffocating room at the Pensione Luigi, the air was thick with despair and the smell of damp wool. Brad sat on the edge of his cot watching Tanisha cry. She had been crying for hours. Her makeup was smeared, her nose was running, and she looked nothing like the glamorous influencer she pretended to be online. Brad felt a familiar itch of annoyance. He had signed up for a luxury vacation. He had signed up for 5-star dining and free-flowing booze. He had not signed up for a refugee camp experience with a family that was suddenly broke. He watched Verna sitting at the tiny wobbly table counting the cash from the envelope for the 10th time. It was the only lifeline they had left. The money from the pawn shop. Brad did the math in his head. Even with the hostel being cheap, food and transport would burn through that stack in a few days. And then what? They were stuck. Nia had made it clear she was not sending a rescue plane. The gravy train had not just derailed, it had exploded. Brad stood up, stretching his arms. He needed a drink. He needed several drinks. He looked at the envelope in Verna's hands. He walked over and put a hand on her shoulder, giving it a squeeze that was meant to be comforting, but felt predatory. "Verna, you need to eat," he said, his voice rough. "You guys have not had anything since the plain peanuts. I am going to go find a market. Get us some bread, maybe some cheese and wine. We need to keep our strength up to fight this." Verna looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and grateful. "Oh, Brad, that is so sweet of you. You are a good boy." She peeled off a few bills, but Brad shook his head. "It is Rome, Verna," he said. "Stuff is expensive near the tourist spots. Better give me extra just in case. I do not want to come up short and have to walk back." She hesitated for a second, her eyes darting to the thinning stack of euros. But then she looked at Tanisha sobbing on the bed and sighed. She handed him a thick wad of bills, almost 500 euros. "Just bring back the change, okay? We need to make this last." "Yeah, of course," Brad said, pocketing the cash. "I will be right back." He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door. He did not look back at his fiancée curled in a ball on a dirty mattress. He did not look back at his future in-laws huddled in their misery. He walked down the 3 flights of stairs and out into the wet Roman night. He walked past the market. He walked past the bakery. He kept walking until he found a bar with red leather booths and a bartender who looked like he did not ask questions. Brad sat down and threw a 50-euro note on the counter. "Whiskey," he ordered. "The expensive stuff. And keep them coming." He took a long sip, feeling the burn slide down his throat. He looked at the stack of cash in his pocket. It was not enough to get him home, but it was enough to forget where he was for a night. He thought about Tanisha back in that room waiting for a sandwich that was never coming. He chuckled darkly. She wanted a prince, but she got a pauper. And right now the pauper was going to drink until the money ran out. He realized with cold clarity that he was done. There was no inheritance coming. There was no big payout. The Brooks family was a sinking ship, and Brad had just stolen the only life raft. Verna and Tanisha walked into the flagship Gucci store on Via dei Condotti like they owned the place despite their wrinkled clothes and the lingering smell of the cheap hostel. It was a reflex for them. When life got hard, they went shopping. It was the only therapy they knew. Verna adjusted her hat, trying to hide the water stains from the rainstorm. She marched past the doorman with her nose in the air, ignoring the skeptical look he gave their battered shoes. Tanisha was right behind her eyes, scanning the racks of leather and silk with a hunger that was almost frightening. They were broke. They were stranded. But in this moment, surrounded by luxury, they could pretend that the last 24 hours had just been a bad dream. They could pretend that the black card still worked. "Look at this," Mom Tanisha whispered, touching a snakeskin handbag with reverence. "It is beautiful. It is 3,000 euros. Verna sighed, stroking the leather. "It is nice, baby. When we get this sorted out with Nia, when she finally apologizes and unlocks the funds, we will come back. We will buy 2. Tanisha nodded, but her eyes did not leave the bag. She looked around the store. The security guard was busy helping a wealthy couple near the entrance. The sales associates were distracted arranging a display of scarves. It was a habit she had picked up years ago, a little thrill she chased whenever she felt slighted by the world. If she could not buy it, she would take it. It was payment for her suffering. She moved to the accessories counter. Her hand hovered over a small leather wallet embossed with the signature double G logo. It was small enough to fit in her palm. Expensive enough to matter. She looked at Verna, who was busy holding a pair of sunglasses up to a mirror, admiring her reflection. Tanisha made her move. In one fluid, practiced motion, she swiped the wallet from the display and slipped it into the deep pocket of her oversized coat. It was seamless. She had done it a dozen times back in Queens at the mall. She looked at Verna and smiled a secret conspiratorial grin. "Let us go, Mom," Tanisha said, linking her arm through Verna's. "This stuff is last season anyway." Verna nodded, putting the sunglasses down. "You are right. Service here is terrible too. No one even offered us water." They turned toward the exit, walking with a brisk, purposeful stride. Tanisha kept her hand in her pocket, clutching the stolen leather. Her heart was racing a familiar adrenaline high that masked the despair of the hostel. They reached the glass doors. The doorman reached out to open them. Tanisha stepped through the threshold, and then the world exploded with noise. The electronic sensors at the door shrieked a high, piercing wail that stopped every conversation in the store. Red lights flashed above the frame. Tanisha froze. The doorman stepped in front of them, his polite demeanor vanishing instantly. He blocked their path, his arm extended like a bar. "Please step back, madame." Verna gasped, clutching her chest. "How dare you? This is a mistake. We did not buy anything. Get out of my way." She tried to push past him, but he was immovable. Two more security guards materialized from the back of the store, moving with terrifying speed. They surrounded Verna and Tanisha, cutting off any escape. One of them pointed at Tanisha's pocket. "The wallet, madame. Please hand it over." Tanisha began to shake. Her face crumbled. It was not a mistake. It was a crime. And this time there was no Nia to pay the bill. The wailing alarm was joined by the sirens of a police cruiser screeching to a halt outside the glass doors. Two carabinieri officers strode into the boutique. They looked nothing like the mall cops back in Queens. These men were intimidating. They wore crisp uniforms with red stripes down the trousers and holstered sidearms that looked very real. Verna immediately tried to take control of the narrative. She pointed a manicured finger at the store manager. "This man assaulted us," she shrieked. "He grabbed my daughter. I want him arrested. I am an American citizen." The older officer ignored her completely. He looked at the security guard who was holding Tanisha by the arm. The guard spoke rapidly in Italian, gesturing to the bulge in Tanisha's coat pocket where the wallet was hidden. The officer nodded once, his face impassive. He turned to Verna and Tanisha. "Passports," he commanded, holding out a gloved hand. Otis stepped forward from where he had been hovering by the display of silk scarves. "Officers, there is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "We left our passports at the hotel. We are staying at the Hotel de la Ville." He lied instinctively, trying to project wealth they did not have. The officer did not blink. He stepped closer to Otis, invading his personal space. "Documents. Now. Or we go to the station." Verna huffed, rummaging into her oversized tote bag. "Fine. Show them Otis. Let them see who they are dealing with. My daughter is a wealthy executive. She will have your badges for this." Otis reluctantly pulled the blue booklets from his inside jacket pocket. He handed them over, his hand shaking slightly. The officer took them and walked over to his partner, who was holding a handheld scanner. They scanned Verna's passport first, then Tanisha's. The device let out a sharp ping. The officers exchanged a look. The younger one said something into his radio, his eyes locked on Tanisha. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly from annoyance to danger. The older officer placed his hand on his holster and walked back to the group. "Tanisha Brooks," he said, his voice hard. "You are Tanisha Brooks." "Yes," Tanisha said, her chin trembling. "So what?" The officer pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest." "For a wallet?" Verna screamed, stepping in front of Tanisha. "It was a mistake. We will pay for it. Take the cash." She tried to shove a handful of euros at him. The officer swatted her hand away. "Not for the wallet, Signora. Your daughter is flagged in the Interpol database. We received a bulletin from the U.S. consulate this morning. Airline ticket fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny involving stolen securities." Tanisha let out a sound like a wounded animal. "No," she whispered. "Nia. She actually did it." "Turn around," the officer barked. He spun Tanisha around and clamped the cold metal cuffs onto her wrists. Tanisha started to scream, a high-pitched, terrified wail that echoed off the marble floors. Verna lunged at the officer, grabbing his arm. "Get your hands off her! You cannot do this!" The second officer moved instantly. He grabbed Verna's wrists and twisted them behind her back. "You are also under arrest, Signora, for obstruction of justice and attempted theft of the merchandise." Otis stood frozen, watching his wife and daughter being manhandled by the Italian police. He looked at the officers, then at the terrified face of his favorite child. "Otis, do something!" Verna shrieked as they dragged her toward the door. "Call the embassy. Call Nia. Fix this." But Otis did not move. He could not fix this. He watched as they were shoved into the back of the police cruiser, their screams cut off by the slamming doors. The lights flashed blue and red against the wet Roman streets. The cars sped away, leaving Otis standing alone on the sidewalk, holding nothing but a wet umbrella and the crushing weight of reality. The game was over. The holding cell at the Rabibia detention center smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a sharp, stinging scent that made Verna gag every time she took a breath. She sat perched on the edge of a cold concrete bench, clutching her designer coat around her like armor. But here it offered no protection. Across the small, barred room, Tanisha was curled into a ball on the dirty floor, rocking back and forth. Her pink velour tracksuit was stained with grime, and her expensive blowout was matted against her skull. She was not screaming anymore. She was whimpering a low, broken sound that grated on Verna's nerves. They were not alone. 3 other women shared the space, watching them with predatory curiosity. One of them, a woman with hard eyes and tattoos climbing up her neck, said something in rapid Italian and laughed. Tanisha flinched, shrinking further into herself. This was not the Roman holiday they had bragged about on Facebook. This was a nightmare stripped of filters and hashtags. Verna looked at her daughter, the golden child who was supposed to be sipping wine on a piazza, and felt a surge of panic so intense it made her dizzy. They were trapped. There was no manager to call, no husband to fix it, and for the first time, Verna realized that her tears and manipulation had no currency in a cage. Across the city, Otis stood in the sterile, air-conditioned waiting room of the U.S. consulate. He was sweating through his shirt, clutching his hat in trembling hands. He had spent the last of his cash on a taxi here, convinced that his American passport was a magic wand that would make the Italian police disappear. When his number was finally called, he rushed to the glass partition, desperate to see a friendly face. "Please," he stammered, leaning close to the microphone. "My wife and daughter, they were arrested. It is a mistake, a family misunderstanding. My daughter Nia, she is just upset. You have to get them out. We just need bail. I can call my credit union." The consular officer, a young woman with a face of stone, looked down at a file on her desk. She did not smile. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice amplified by the speaker, "I have reviewed the report from the Carabinieri. This is not a simple family dispute. Your wife and daughter are being held on charges of grand larceny, identity theft, and international fraud. The evidence provided by the victim in New York is substantial." "Evidence?" Otis choked out. "What evidence?" "Video surveillance of a theft from a private safe." The officer read from the file. "Electronic records of unauthorized flight changes. And a police report filed this morning in Queens. The Italian authorities are cooperating with the NYPD. Because of the nature of the charges and the flight risk, the magistrate has denied bail." "Denied?" Otis whispered, the room spinning around him. "But we are Americans. That does not grant you immunity from Italian law," the officer said, closing the file. "And frankly, sir, the charges are severe. The consulate cannot intervene in a criminal investigation. We can provide a list of English-speaking attorneys, but that is the extent of our assistance. Unless Ms. Brooks decides to drop the charges, your family will remain in custody until their hearing." Otis stared at his reflection in the safety glass. He looked small, old, and defeated. He realized with a terrifying clarity that Nia was not playing a game. She had locked them up and thrown away the key, and the United States government was not going to help him find it. Otis walked the 3 miles back to the Pensione Luigi because he did not have the fare for a taxi. The Roman heat beat down on him, soaking his shirt with sweat and making his heart hammer against his ribs. He felt like a ghost walking through a city of the living. The rejection at the consulate had broken something inside him. He needed to talk to Brad. Brad was street smart. Brad would know what to do. Maybe Brad still had some of the cash Verna had given him for food. They could use it to hire a lawyer, or at least buy a calling card to beg Nia for mercy. Otis clung to this thought like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. Brad was family. Brad would help. He trudged up the 3 flights of stairs to the hostel room, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He fumbled with the heavy brass key, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. He pushed it open, expecting to see Brad sprawled on a cot nursing a hangover. The room was empty. Otis stood in the doorway blinking. The silence was absolute. He stepped inside and the door creaked shut behind him. He looked at the corner where they had stacked the luggage. The pile looked different. It was smaller. Otis counted the bags. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 bags were missing. The 2 silver Rimowa hard-shell suitcases. The ones Nia had bought for herself. The ones that cost $1,000 each. A cold stone of dread formed in Otis' stomach. He rushed to the wobbly table where Verna had left her purse before they went to Gucci. The purse was there, but it was open. He dumped the contents onto the table. Lipstick, tissues, a hairbrush, no wallet, no cash envelope. He ran to the mattress where Brad had been sleeping. He flipped the thin pillow. He tore the gray blanket off the cot. Nothing. Brad's dirty backpack was gone. His guitar case was gone. Otis spun around, searching the room frantically. He checked under the bed. He checked the wardrobe. He even checked the hallway bathroom, praying that Brad was just taking a shower, but the bathroom was empty. Otis stumbled back into the room and collapsed onto the floor. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Brad was gone. The man who had lived in his basement for 3 years without paying rent. The man who had eaten his food and drank his beer. The man who had shoved Nia to the ground at JFK. He had robbed them. Brad had seen Verna and Tanisha get arrested. He had seen the police car drive away. And instead of coming to help, instead of calling Otis, he had run back to the hostel. He had taken the last of the cash. He had taken the most expensive luggage. And he had vanished into the streets of Rome. Otis put his head in his hands. They had nothing. No money. No passports. No clothes except what he was wearing. They were stranded in a foreign country with no allies and no resources. They had stolen Nia's vacation to live like royalty, but now they were destitutes. The golden child was in a cell. The mother was in handcuffs. And the father was sitting on a dirty floor, realizing that the son-in-law he had defended against his own daughter was nothing more than a thief who had picked their bones clean. They were truly alone. Otis sat on the floor of the empty hostel room, staring at the phone he had borrowed from the sympathetic clerk downstairs. He had one chance, one phone call before the international minutes ran out. He dialed the number he knew by heart, the number he had ignored for years, unless he needed money. Nia's number. The phone rang twice, then 3 times. Otis held his breath, praying she would not send him to voicemail again. Hello? Nia's voice was cool, distant, like she was speaking from another planet. Otis broke. The dam holding back his fear and shame burst open. Nia, he sobbed, the tears running hot down his face. Nia, baby, please. You have to help us. It is a disaster. Brad is gone. He took everything. The money, the bags, everything. Your mother and sister are in jail. They are in a cage, Nia. The consulate won't help. They said the charges are too serious. Please, baby girl. We are sorry. We are so sorry. Just get us home. There was silence on the other end. Otis could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. Dad, Nia said finally, her voice devoid of pity. I told you this would happen. You stole from me. You stole my identity. I know, Otis wept. We were wrong. We were greedy. But we are your family. You cannot leave them in an Italian prison. Tanisha is not built for that. She is scared. Your mother is sick. Please, Nia. I will do anything. Anything you want. Just make it stop. Otis waited, his heart pounding in his ears. He heard Nia sigh. It was a long, tired sound. I am not dropping the charges, Dad, she said. I filed that report because a crime was committed. I am not going to lie to the police to save you from the consequences of your actions. Otis felt the world closing in. No, Nia, please, they will be in there for months. However, Nia continued cutting him off. I have spoken to my lawyer. He has contacts in Rome. We can arrange for an expedited deportation hearing. Instead of waiting 6 months for a trial, they can plead guilty and be deported immediately. Banned from the EU for 10 years, but they will be home by the end of the week. Oh, thank God. Otis breathed relief washing over him so strong it made him dizzy. Thank you, Nia. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, she said sharply. This is not a gift. It is a transaction. I will pay for the lawyer to arrange this. I will pay for 3 one-way economy tickets home. But there is a condition. Anything, Otis said. Name it. You stole $50,000 from my safe, Nia said. You pawned my grandmother's jewelry and cashed my bonds. I want that money back. We don't have it, Otis whispered. Brad took the cash. It is gone. I know you don't have cash, Dad, Nia said. But you have assets. I am emailing a document to the hostel's front desk right now. It is a confession of debt. It states that you and Mom borrowed $50,000 from me secured against the equity in your house. It acknowledges the theft and converts it into a civil loan. You sign it, scan it, and send it back. If you do that, I make the call to Rome. If you don't, I hang up and you figure out Italian prison on your own. My house, Otis stammered. But Nia, that is our home. It is collateral, Dad, Nia said. Just like my jewelry was collateral for your vacation. Sign the paper. Or don't. You have 10 minutes. The line went dead. Otis stared at the phone. He looked around the dirty room. He thought of Verna in a cell. He thought of Tanisha crying. He stood up, his knees cracking. He walked downstairs to the front desk where the printer was already whirring. He picked up the paper. It was a deal with the devil, but he had no soul left to bargain with. He asked for a pen. Otis stood at the scarred wooden counter of the Pensione Luigi, staring at the fresh ink on the paper. The hum of the printer fan was the only sound in the cramped lobby. The clerk watched him with bored indifference, flipping through a magazine while Otis held the pen like it was a loaded gun. The document was titled, Confession of Judgment, and Secured Promissory Note. It looked official. It looked legal. It looked like the end of his life. He read the terms, his eyes blurring. I, Otis Brooks, acknowledge a debt of $50,000 owed to Nia Brooks for value received. He flinched at the phrase value received. It was not value. It was theft. It was the pawned jewelry, the cashed bonds, the stolen legacy of his own mother. Nia was making him admit it in writing, making him confess to his crime to save his family from prison. Then his eyes snagged on the clause at the bottom. Paragraph 4. Repayment terms. The borrower agrees to repay the full principal amount of $50,000 within 30 days of the date of this agreement. Failure to satisfy this debt in full by the deadline will result in immediate default. Upon default, the borrower agrees to surrender all rights, title, and interest in the real property located at the Queen's address to the lender as full satisfaction of the debt. The borrower waives all rights to foreclosure proceedings and agrees to immediate eviction. 30 days. Otis felt the blood drain from his face. He did not have 30 days. He did not have 30 years. Brad had stolen their cash. Their bank accounts were frozen by the fraud investigation. They were destitute. Signing this was not taking a loan. It was signing a deed of transfer. It was handing Nia the keys to the house. He hesitated, the pen hovering over the signature line. That house was everything. It was where he raised his girls. It was his retirement. It was the only thing he had left. If he signed this, they would be homeless in a month. But then he thought of Verna. He thought of her weeping in that cold cell surrounded by strangers. He thought of Tanisha, the golden child who had never spent a night without high-thread count sheets, now sleeping on a concrete floor. He imagined them rotting in an Italian prison for months, waiting for a trial they would lose. He pictured the guards, the shame, the phone calls he would have to make to relatives back home, begging for bail money that no one would give. He had no choice. Nia had checkmated him. She knew he had no money. She knew he could not pay. She was not asking for the $50,000 back. She was taking the house. He gripped the pen tighter. His hand shook so badly the tip scratched the paper. He pressed down. He wrote his name. Otis Brooks. The signature was jagged and ugly, a scrawl of defeat. He signed Verna's name as her power of attorney, a lie he had used 1,000 times before, but never with stakes this high. He handed the paper to the clerk. "Scan it," he whispered, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Send it." The clerk fed the paper into the scanner. The machine whirred a high-pitched grinding sound that felt like it was chewing up Otis' soul. The email sent notification popped up on the screen. It was done. He had sold his home to buy his family out of jail. He walked out of the lobby and sat on the curb, the damp Roman air chilling him to the bone. He had saved them, but he knew with a terrifying certainty that when they got home they would have nowhere to go. 3 days in the Rabibia detention center had stripped away every layer of my family's pretense. When the heavy iron doors finally buzzed open, Verna and Tanisha did not walk out with their heads held high. They shuffled out. Their designer clothes were wrinkled and stained with sweat and prison grime. Tanisha's hair, which she had spent hundreds of dollars styling before the trip, was a matted disaster. Verna looked 10 years older, her face gray and sagging without her makeup. But they were not free. 2 unsmiling immigration officers were waiting for them at the gate. They were not being released into the Roman sunshine to enjoy a gelato. They were being deported. They were shoved into the back of a police van with caged windows, not the luxury sedan they had expected upon arrival. The ride to Fiumicino Airport was silent and terrifying. Otis was waiting for them at the terminal, flanked by 2 more officers, looking like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. There were no hugs, no tears of relief, just the cold, hard reality of the law. The officers marched them past the duty-free shops they had planned to loot straight to immigration control. The stamp that came down on their passports was heavy and final. Persona non grata. They were permanently barred from entering the European Union. Their Roman holiday had turned into a lifetime exile. They would never see Paris. They would never shop in Milan. They were being kicked off the continent like unwanted trash. Then came the flight. I had paid for their tickets home as promised, but I was not feeling generous. I bought the absolute cheapest tickets available. Basic economy on a budget carrier. The seats were non-reclining and located in the very last row right next to the lavatories. They boarded last, forcing them to do a walk of shame down the entire length of the plane, past the first-class pods they had stolen on the way over. They were separated. Otis was jammed into a middle seat between 2 large men who had clearly enjoyed a garlic-heavy lunch. Verna was squeezed into a middle seat 5 rows back next to a screaming toddler who threw a sticky toy at her face before they even took off. And Tanisha, the golden child, who had posted about living her best life just days ago, was sandwiched in the back row between a group of rowdy soccer fans who had been drinking since noon. They sang loud off-key songs and spilled cheap beer on her velour tracksuit. She could not move. She could not escape. And worst of all, they were starving. The basic tickets did not include meals. They had no money to buy snacks from the cart. They had to smell the heated pasta being served to the paying passengers while their stomachs cramped with hunger. For 9 hours, they sat in that metal tube, dehydrated, humiliated, and trapped, listening to the flush of the toilet and the jeers of drunk strangers. They had flown there as queens, but they were returning as cargo. While my family was suffering in economy class over the Atlantic, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on Wall Street. The air was cool and smelled of expensive coffee. Across from me sat Arthur and a nervous-looking loan officer from the mortgage division of the bank. We were looking at a file thick with red flags. I opened the folder labeled Brooks Residence. I expected to see a paid-off deed. I had paid off their mortgage 3 years ago as a thank you gift. I thought I had given them security. I was wrong. The document on top was a home equity line of credit taken out 5 years ago. The principal amount was $200,000. I scanned the withdrawal history. It was a diary of Tanisha's entitlement. $20,000 for a car, $15,000 for a business loan for a boutique that never opened, $10,000 for a vacation to Miami, $5,000 for Brad's legal fees. They had drained the equity in the house to fund my sister's lifestyle, and they had stopped paying it back. 3 months delinquent, the loan officer said, tapping the paper. We were preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings next week. The notices were sent but ignored. They ignored them because they thought I would fix it, I realized. They thought if the bank came calling, Nia would just write a check. They banked on my guilt. They bet their house on my inability to say no. They lost that bet. I looked at Arthur. Do it, I said. Arthur nodded and slid a cashier's check across the table. It was drawn from a shell company I had set up years ago for privacy. NB Holdings, LLC. The check was for the full amount of the outstanding debt plus penalties. We are purchasing the note, Arthur said, his voice smooth as silk. NB Holdings will take over as the lien holder, effective immediately. We will handle the collections process from here. The loan officer looked relieved to get the toxic asset off his books. He stamped the papers. Sold. I signed the transfer documents. The ink was still wet when the realization hit me. I was no longer just their daughter. I was no longer just their victim. I was their bank. I was their landlord. I held the deed to the roof over their heads. They were flying home thinking they could just go back to Queens and hide. They thought they could cry and apologize, and maybe I would let them stay until they got back on their feet. They did not know that the ground had shifted beneath them. They were flying toward a house they no longer owned. They were flying toward a foreclosure that was personal. I stood up and shook the loan officer's hand. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter than I had in years. I had the deed in my briefcase. I had the power. And when they landed, I was going to be waiting on the front porch, not with a welcome mat, but with an eviction notice. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the prey to walk in. The wheels of the budget airliner screeched against the tarmac at JFK, marking the end of the longest 9 hours of my family's lives. They did not disembark with the swagger of royalty this time. They shuffled off the plane last held back by the flight attendants until every other passenger had exited. They walked into the terminal blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights, looking like survivors of a shipwreck. Their clothes, the expensive outfits they had worn to impress the Italians, were wrinkled and stained with sweat, and the cheap beer the soccer fans had spilled on them. They smelled of stale airplane air and fear. Verna clutched her purse to her chest, but it was light now, empty of the stolen jewelry and the black card that had been her magic wand. Tanisha looked the worst. The golden child was tarnished beyond recognition. Her hair was a matted mess, her face puffy and red from hours of crying. She kept looking around as if expecting Brad to pop out from behind a pillar with a smile and a stack of cash. But Brad was gone. He was probably halfway to California by now, spending the money he stole from them. Tanisha had lost her fiancé. She had lost her dignity. She had lost the future she felt entitled to. She walked with her head down, trying to hide her face from the crowds, terrified someone might recognize the girl from the viral arrest video. They reached the arrivals hall and the hunger hit them. They had not eaten a real meal in 2 days. The smell of Auntie Anne's pretzels wafted through the air, and Otis actually stopped staring at the display case with a longing that was painful to witness. He reached into his pocket, out of habit, but his hand came out empty. They did not have $5 for a pretzel. They did not have $1 for a bottle of water. They were destitute in the city they called home. Verna tried to rally. She pulled out her phone, her battery flashing red on 4%. She opened the Uber app. She tapped in the address in Queens. She hit request ride. The app spun for a second, then flashed a message. Payment method declined. Please update. She tried again. Declined. She looked at Otis, panic rising in her eyes. It is not working, she hissed. Call a Lyft. Otis shook his head. I told you, Verna. The accounts are frozen. We have nothing. They stood on the curb outside the terminal, watching the black town cars and yellow taxis whisk people away to comfortable homes and warm dinners. Verna looked at the line of cars, her face twisting in humiliation. She could not walk. It was too far. She could not call a friend. She had burnt every bridge bragging about her European tour. There was only one option left. The Q3 bus. It was the ultimate come-down. The bus stop was crowded and cold. They dragged their few remaining bags over to the shelter standing next to exhausted airport workers and tourists on a budget. Verna tried to stand apart to maintain some shred of superiority, but she was just another tired, broke woman waiting for public transit. Tanisha leaned against the graffiti-covered glass and slid down to the ground, burying her face in her knees. When the bus finally hissed to a halt in front of them, Otis had to beg the driver to let them on, promising to pay him back later. The driver looked at their disheveled clothes and desperate eyes and waved them through out of pity. They slumped into the hard plastic seats, the engine roaring beneath them, carrying them back to Queens, not as conquerors, but as failures. They thought the worst was over. They thought they were going home, to sleep in their own beds. They had no idea that they were heading toward a door that would never open for them again. The bus ride from JFK to Queens took forever. Every stop was a fresh torture. When the doors finally hissed open at their corner, they practically fell onto the sidewalk. The streetlights were flickering overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement. It was a familiar scene. The same cracks in the sidewalk, the same neighbors' cars parked in the driveways. For a moment, they allowed themselves to feel a flicker of hope. They were home. All they had to do was walk down the block, unlock the front door, and collapse into their own beds. They could figure out the money later. They could apologize to Nia later. Right now, they just needed sleep. Verna led the way, her heels clicking unevenly on the concrete. She was clutching her purse like a lifeline, muttering about a hot bath and a glass of wine. Tanisha dragged her feet behind her, looking at the ground. Otis brought up the rear, carrying the last of the luggage, his back screaming in protest. They turned onto their street. The house came into view. At first, it looked normal. The brick facade was the same. The oak tree in the front yard was the same. But as they got closer, the illusion shattered. The house was completely dark. Not just the lights off, but a heavy, oppressive darkness that felt empty. And then they saw it. Staked right in the middle of the front lawn, where Verna had planted her prize-winning hydrangeas, was a sign. It was not a for sale sign. It was a large, aggressive placard painted in neon orange and black. Property seized. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. Verna stopped so abruptly that Tanisha bumped into her. She stared at the sign, her mouth opening and closing silently. She blinked hard as if trying to clear a hallucination. "That is a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is a prank. Some neighborhood kids are playing a prank on us." She dropped her bag and ran toward the porch. She moved with a desperate, frantic energy, scrambling up the steps. She reached into her purse and pulled out her keyring. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped them once, the metal clattering loudly on the wood. She snatched them up and jammed the house key toward the lock. It did not fit. She pushed harder, grinding the metal against the cylinder. It would not go in. She pulled it back and looked at the lock. It was brand new, shiny brass, unscratched. The old weathered deadbolt they had used for 20 years was gone. "No," Verna screamed, slamming her palm against the wood. "No. This is my house. Open the door." She looked down. Across the seam of the door and the frame was a heavy strip of red tape. Printed on it in bold black letters were the words, "Sealed by order of the bank. Do not remove." Otis stood at the bottom of the steps, staring at the orange sign in the yard. He felt a cold sickness spreading through his gut. He remembered the document in the Roman hotel lobby. The confession of judgment. The waiver of foreclosure rights. He had signed it. He had signed it to save them from prison, but he never thought the consequences would be waiting for them the second they returned. He thought he had 30 days. He thought he had time to beg. But Nia moved faster than the law. She moved faster than mercy. Tanisha walked up to the sign and touched it. The paint was dry. It was real. She looked up at the dark windows of her bedroom, the room where she had stored her inventory, the room she had taken from Nia. It was locked away now. Seized. Mom, Tanisha whined, her voice high and thin with panic. Why does my key not work? Why is there a sign? Where are we going to sleep? Verna turned around on the porch, her back pressed against the sealed door. She looked wild. Her hair was coming loose from her bun and her eyes were wide with terror. She looked at Otis. Fix this, she shrieked. Otis, break a window. Get us inside. It is cold. I want to go inside. Otis looked at the sign again. Violators will be prosecuted. He knew Nia. If they broke a window, she would not just sue them, she would send the police. They were not homeowners anymore. They were trespassers, and the house they had taken for granted was now a fortress built to keep them out. Verna stared at the sealed door with the eyes of a cornered animal. The cold wind bit through her thin designer coat, and the reality of spending the night on the concrete porch snapped the last tether of her sanity. She marched over to the flower bed, where a heavy decorative garden rock sat among the dead hydrangeas. She picked it up with a grunt of exertion, her manicured nails digging into the rough stone. Otis realized what she was doing too late. He lunged for her, shouting her name, but Verna was already swinging. She hurled the rock at the bay window next to the door. The sound of shattering glass tore through the quiet suburban street. It was a violent, jagged noise that set the neighborhood dogs barking. Verna reached through the broken pane, her hand fumbling for the window latch. Get inside, she hissed at Tanisha. Climb through and open the door. Before Tanisha could move, a blinding spotlight flooded the lawn. Red and blue lights erupted from the street, turning the front of the house into a strobe-lit nightmare. A siren blipped once, short and aggressive. 2 police cruisers had been parked just down the block, sitting in the shadows, waiting. I had called the precinct 3 hours ago. I told them there would be intruders tonight. I told them the former tenants were volatile. Step away from the window! A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Put your hands where we can see them! Verna froze, her arms still inside the broken window. 2 officers emerged from the cruisers, their hands resting on their holsters. One of them was Officer Miller, the same man who had taken my report about the safe. He did not look sympathetic. He looked tired of dealing with the Brooks family. Officer, thank God, Verna cried, pulling her arm back and raising her hands. We are locked out. We lost our keys. This is our house. You have to help us. Officer Miller walked up the driveway, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and shone his flashlight directly into Verna's face, blinding her. This is not your house, Mom, he said, his voice flat and authoritative. I have the property records right here. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the title for this address was transferred. The bank foreclosed on the previous owner, Otis Brooks, due to default on a confessed judgment. The property was sold at a private auction. Sold, Verna shrieked. That is a lie. We were on vacation. You cannot sell a house while people are on vacation. You can when the owner signs a waiver of foreclosure proceedings, Officer Miller said, looking at Otis. Did you sign a document in Italy, Mr. Brooks? A confession of judgment. Otis looked down at his shoes, unable to meet his wife's gaze. Verna turned on him, her eyes wide with horror, but Officer Miller cut her off. It does not matter what you discussed. The law is clear. The deed belongs to a limited liability company now. NB Holdings. They have requested 0 tolerance for trespassers. You just broke a window on private property. That is vandalism and breaking and entering. But we live here, Tanisha wailed from behind her mother. All my stuff is inside. My clothes, my shoes. Your tenancy was terminated the moment the title transferred, the officer said. You are not residents. You are intruders. I am going to give you one chance because I know you just got back into the country. You can step off this porch and walk away right now, or I can put you in the back of the car and book you for felony trespassing. Given your recent legal troubles in Rome, I would suggest you walk. Verna looked at the broken window, then at the officer, and finally at Otis. She was shaking with rage and cold. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But the memory of the Italian cell was too fresh. She lowered her hands. She stepped off the porch. She was not a homeowner anymore. She was a criminal on her own front lawn. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade rolled up to the curb, purring like a panther in the dark. The tinted windows were pitch black, reflecting the flashing police lights. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. I placed one stiletto heel on the pavement and stepped out into the cold night air. I was wearing a white tailored power suit that glowed under the streetlights, sharp and immaculate. I looked like I owned the block because I did. I was not alone. Arthur stepped out from the other side of the car, holding a thick leather briefcase. Behind him, a man in blue coveralls carrying a heavy drill and a box of deadbolts jumped out of the passenger seat. The locksmith. The foreclosure squad. We stood there in a line, a wall of legal and financial authority, facing the disheveled wreckage of my family. Nia Verna screamed. She broke away from the huddle on the sidewalk and ran toward me, her arms outstretched like a woman drowning. "Oh, thank God, baby girl, you are here. You have to help us. It is a nightmare. The bank went crazy. They stole the house, Nia. They changed the locks while we were gone. Tell these officers who we are. Tell them this is a mistake." She tried to grab my lapel, her dirty fingers reaching for the pristine white fabric. Arthur stepped in front of me, blocking her path with his briefcase. "Please maintain a distance, Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice cool and professional. "My client prefers not to be touched." Verna stopped blinking at Arthur, then looking at me. Her client? Nia? What is he talking about? "Tell him to move. We need to get inside. It is freezing, and your father is about to collapse. Fix this, Nia. The bank is trying to rob us." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was a mess. Her eyeliner was smeared. Her expensive coat was ruined. And she smelled like the cheap hostel soap she had been forced to use. But underneath it all, the entitlement was still there. She still thought she could order me around. She still thought I existed to serve her. She thought I was there to write a check and make the bad men go away. "The bank did not rob you, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the night air. "The bank followed standard procedure for a defaulted loan, a loan that was secured by a confession of judgment signed by Dad in Italy." Otis looked up from the sidewalk, his face gray. "You told me it was a loan, Nia. You said I was signing for a loan." "I said it was a confession, Dad," I corrected him. "And I said if you did not pay it back in 30 days, the collateral would be seized. You did not pay. You did not even try. So the bank foreclosed." "But who buys a house in one day?" Verna cried, looking at the sealed door. "Who would do this to a family? Who has that kind of money ready to go?" I walked past her up the driveway. My heels clicked on the pavement, echoing the sound of the gavel that had sealed their fate. I stopped next to the police officer and nodded at the locksmith. "Go ahead," I said. "Drill it out. I want new locks on every door." Verna stared at me, horror dawning on her face. "Wait," she whispered. You bought it." I turned to face them. The flashing police lights painted my white suit in strokes of red and blue. "I did not buy it, Mom," I said. "My holding company bought it. NB Holdings, Nia Brooks Holdings. I am the new owner, and you are trespassing on my property." I stood on the driveway in my white power suit, looking at the people who raised me. They looked small. They looked pathetic. Verna was clutching her chest like she was rehearsing for a soap opera death scene, while Otis stared at the pavement, unable to lift his head. The flashing lights of the police cruisers washed over us, creating a strobe effect that made their fear look jagged and raw. Arthur handed me the black leather portfolio he had been guarding. It was heavy with the weight of their bad decisions. I unzipped it. The sound was loud in the quiet street, like a zipper on a body bag. "You keep screaming that the bank robbed you, Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady. It was the voice I used when I told a CEO their career was over. But banks do not rob people. Banks collect on debts. And when the bank put this house up for auction this morning at 9 o'clock, I was the first and only bidder. I pulled out the deed. The blue legal paper was crisp and fresh, the embossed seal catching the light. I held it up so they could see it clearly. Here is the title transfer. Here is the bill of sale. And here is the certificate of ownership. It is all legal. It is all notarized. And it is all mine. Verna stopped crying instantly. Her mouth fell open as she stared at the papers in my hand. She looked from the deed to my face, trying to reconcile the daughter she had bullied for years with the woman standing before her, holding the keys to her kingdom. You, she whispered the word coming out like a curse. You did this. You planned this. You stole our home. I did not plan for you to steal my identity, I said coldly. I did not plan for you to rob my safe or leave me stranded at JFK. I reacted. I protected my assets. And since you decided to treat my bank account like your personal piggy bank, I decided to treat your house like a distressed asset. I acquired it. Tanisha stepped forward from the shadows. She looked like a drowned rat in her dirty tracksuit, but her entitlement was still fully intact. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her face twisted in disbelief. You bought Mom and Dad's house, she screeched. Are you crazy? How could you do that? You kicked your own parents out on the street. You are sick, Nia. You are actually sick. How dare you? I looked at my sister, the girl who had never worked a day in her life, the girl who stole my vacation and my jewelry. I dare because I can? I said, stepping closer to her until she flinched back. I dare because I have the money you tried to steal, and correction, Tanisha. It is not Mom and Dad's house. It is not your house. It was the bank's house, and now it is my house. So lower your finger before I have the officer add harassment to your list of charges. The look of shock on her face was worth every penny I had spent. She realized for the first time that the rules had changed. I was not the sister anymore. I was the landlord. Arthur handed me the second folder. It was thick, heavy with the weight of 5 years of bad decisions. I did not open it this time. I did not need to read it. I had memorized every line item, every reckless withdrawal, every moment my parents chose their youngest daughter over their financial security. I looked at Tanisha, who was still standing there with her mouth open, playing the victim. She looked at me with hatred, but underneath it was confusion. She genuinely did not understand how this had happened. She thought money just appeared when she asked for it. She never asked where it came from. I took the stack of stapled bank statements out of the folder. I did not hand them to her. I threw them. The papers fluttered through the air like dead leaves, hitting Tanisha in the chest and scattering across the driveway. Pick them up, I said, my voice cutting through the night air. Read them, Tanisha. Look at the reason you are homeless. Tanisha swatted at the papers. I do not want to look at your fake papers. You are just trying to confuse everyone. They are not fake, I snapped. They are the monthly statements for the home equity line of credit Mom and Dad took out 5 years ago. A second mortgage on the house I had already paid off for them. $200,000, Tanisha. That is how much equity they drained from this property. And where did it go? Did it go to repairs? Did it go to investments? No, it went to you. Verna let out a sob, covering her face with her hands, but I did not stop. I pointed at the scattered papers. Look at page 3, $10,000 for your modeling portfolio that went nowhere. Page 15, $5,000 for Brad's DJ equipment that he pawned a month later. Page 20. The down payment on that luxury lease you crashed 3 months later. Every single dime of equity in this house was converted into cash and handed to you so you could play pretend princess. You bled this house dry. Tanisha looked down at the papers at her feet. She saw the numbers. She saw the dates. Her face paled. Mom told me that was his pension, she whispered, looking at Verna. She said Dad had a pension. Dad does not have a pension, I said brutally. Dad has a hole in his retirement fund the size of your ego. They stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago because there was nothing left to extract. The bank sent default notices. They sent foreclosure warnings. Mom hid them. She thought if she ignored them, they would go away, or she thought I would swoop in and save the day like I always do. I took a step closer to my sister, my heels crunching on the statements. This house was already gone, Tanisha. It was lost the minute you decided you were too good to work. The bank was going to auction it off next week to the highest bidder. Some developer would have bought it, bulldozed it, and built condos. I stepped in. I bought the debt. I bought the deed. I saved the structure. But I am not saving the parasites who live inside it. This house died because of your greed. I just paid for the funeral. Otis stared at the scattered bank statements fluttering on the driveway like the ghosts of his retirement. The fight drained out of him. He did not look like the stern father who had scolded me at the airport anymore. He looked like a man who had gambled his life savings on a bad horse and lost. His knees buckled. He sank down onto the cold concrete right there in front of the police officers and the locksmith. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my white trousers, his rough hands shaking. "Nia, please," he croaked, his voice cracking with desperation. "I know we messed up. I know I signed that paper in Rome. But you cannot do this. You cannot leave your mother and me on the street. We are old, Nia. My back is bad. Your mother has high blood pressure. We have nowhere to go. No one will take us in." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness. Just a cold, clinical observation of a man who had finally run out of runway. "You had somewhere to go, Dad," I said, pulling my leg away from his grasp. "You had a paid-off house. You had a pension. You traded it all for a 2-week vacation and a daughter who refuses to work. You made your bed. Now you have to sleep in it. Even if it is a park bench." Otis let out a wail that sounded like a dying animal. But Verna did not join him. I watched her eyes dart back and forth, calculating. She looked at the deed in my hand. She looked at the police. She looked at Tanisha standing there in her filthy tracksuit. And then she made her move. The survival instinct of a parasite looking for a new host. "It is not my fault," Verna screamed suddenly, pointing a shaking finger at Tanisha. "It is her. It is all her fault. She made me do it, Nia. She is the one who wanted the vacation. She is the one who needed the clothes and the car. I told her we could not afford it. I told her we should stop. But she cried, Nia. You know how she gets. She said she would kill herself if she did not get that boutique loan. I only signed those papers because I was scared for her life." Tanisha stepped back as if her mother had slapped her. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying? You planned the trip. You told me Nia owed us. You helped me break into the safe." "Liar," Verna shrieked, lunging at Tanisha. "You little liar. You manipulated me. You used me. I am an old woman, Nia. I did not know what I was signing. She tricked me. She ruined us. Do not punish me for her greed. Let me inside, Nia. I am your mother. I was just a victim of her selfishness, just like you." I watched them scream at each other, the golden child and the enabler finally tearing each other apart. It was the ugliest thing I had ever seen, and it was the perfect ending to their story. I watched the spectacle of my mother and sister tearing each other apart on the front lawn. It was pathetic. It was the inevitable end of a relationship built on greed and enablement. They were not fighting for each other anymore. They were fighting for survival, and they were willing to use each other as stepping stones to keep their heads above water. Even Otis had stopped crying and was looking back and forth between them with dull, horrified eyes. The neighbors were starting to come out onto their porches, drawn by the screaming. I decided to end it. "Enough," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through their shrieking like a knife. Verna froze mid-scream, her hand still pointing accusingly at Tanisha. They both turned to look at me, panting heavily, their breath clouding in the freezing night air. They looked at the keys in my hand with a desperate, hungry hope. "I am going to open the door," I said, stepping up to the police tape. Verna let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank you, Nia. Thank you. I knew you would not do this to us. I knew you had a heart." She started to move toward the steps, dragging her feet. Stop, I commanded. I held up a hand. I am not letting you move back in. You do not live here anymore. I am giving you a grace period. A very short, very specific grace period. Tanisha wiped her nose on her sleeve. What does that mean? It means you have 30 minutes, I said. I looked at Officer Miller. Officer, would you mind timing them? Officer Miller nodded, checking his watch. 30 minutes starting when the door opens. I turned back to my family. You have 30 minutes to go inside and pack your personal effects. And when I say personal effects, I mean clothes, toiletries, and medication. That is it. But the furniture, Verna stammered. The silver set. The television. My antique vanity. That stays. I said, my voice hard as granite. Everything of value in that house is now the property of NB Holdings. The electronics, the furniture, the appliances, the art. All of it stays. Consider it a down payment on the $50,000 you stole from my safe. You liquidated my assets, so I am liquidating yours. But that is not fair, Tanisha cried. My laptop is in there, my gaming system. You bought that laptop with the money you stole from the home equity line, I countered. It belongs to the house. If you try to take anything other than the clothes on your back, Officer Miller will arrest you for theft. Do you understand? They stared at me in silence, the reality of the situation settling over them like a shroud. They were not getting their home back. They were getting a chance to grab a coat before being cast out forever. Do you understand? I repeated. Yes, Otis whispered, his head hanging low. Yes, Nia, we understand. I turned and walked up the steps. The locksmith had already drilled out the core. I inserted the new key and turned it. The mechanism clicked, a sound of finality. I pushed the door open, revealing the dark, warm interior of the house. The clock starts now, I said, stepping aside. They ran. They did not walk. They scrambled up the steps, pushing past me like animals escaping a cage. Verna headed straight for the master bedroom. Tanisha sprinted for the stairs. Otis wandered into the living room, looking lost. I stood in the doorway, watching them frantically stuff their lives into garbage bags under the watchful eyes of the police. It was not a homecoming. It was a raid, and I was the one holding the stopwatch. The inside of the house turned into a war zone within seconds. It was not the dignified packing of a family moving on. It was a frenzied scavenging of a shipwreck. They did not even have suitcases because Brad had stolen the good ones, and the rest were lost in the chaos of the airport. I watched as Verna ran to the kitchen and ripped a roll of black garbage bags from the drawer. She threw one at Otis and one at Tanisha, screaming at them to move faster. The sound of plastic tearing and heavy footsteps thundering on the hardwood floors filled the silence that had once occupied my childhood home. I stood by the front door, checking the time on my phone. 20 minutes left. From the living room, I heard the crash of something breaking. I walked in to see Verna trying to shove her collection of antique silver candlesticks into a trash bag. Officer Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Put it back, ma'am," he said, his voice bored but firm. "The owner said personal effects only. Silverware stays." Verna shrieked, slamming the silver onto the coffee table. "This is my grandmother's silver. It has been in the family for 50 years. It is an asset," I said from the doorway. "And you owe my company $50,000. The silver stays. Keep packing, Mom. You are wasting time." Upstairs, Tanisha was having a meltdown. I could hear her screaming from the hallway. She was in her room ripping clothes off the hangers in clumps. She was not folding anything. She was just jamming silk blouses and designer jeans into a bag until it threatened to burst. She came running out of her room, dragging the bulging bag behind her, and collided with Otis, who was shuffling out of the master bedroom with an armful of shirts. "Watch where you are going, you idiot," Tanisha screamed at her own father. "You are blocking my way." Otis dropped a shoe and Tanisha kicked it down the stairs. "I hate you," she yelled. "I hate both of you. You said we were going to be rich. You said Nia would pay for everything. Look at us. We are garbage picking in our own house." Verna ran up the stairs, her face flushed and sweaty. Do not talk to your father that way, Tanisha. We did this for you. We stole that money for you. And this is the thanks we get, you ungrateful little brat. If you had just gotten a job like a normal person, we would still have a roof over our heads. Tanisha threw her bag down on the landing. Oh, so now it is my fault. You are the one who wanted to go to Rome, Mom. You are the one who wanted to show off to your church friends. You used me as an excuse to steal Nia's money. Do not put this on me. I checked my watch again. 10 minutes. I called out, my voice carrying over their bickering. The fighting intensified as the panic set in. They started grabbing random things. Otis tried to take the cable box. Officer Miller took it out of his hands. Verna tried to sneak a small painting into her coat. I pointed it out and she had to put it back on the wall, her hands shaking with humiliation. They were turning on each other completely. The facade of the happy, close-knit family was gone, replaced by three desperate people fighting over scraps. They pushed each other out of the way. They cursed at each other. They spilled secrets they had kept hidden for years. Verna screamed that she wished she had never had Tanisha. Tanisha screamed that she wished she had been born into a different family. Otis just wept softly, stuffing socks into his pockets. 5 minutes, I announced. Wrap it up. They scrambled down the stairs, dragging their black plastic bags. They looked like burglars robbing their own lives. They were sweating, panting, and crying. The elegance of the first-class lounge seemed like a lifetime ago. Here in the harsh light of the foyer, they were just looters caught in the act. I watched them pile up by the door, their eyes darting around looking for one last thing to grab, one last piece of value to take with them. But there was nothing left. I had stripped them clean. Time is up, I said, opening the front door to the cold night. Get out. I looked at the clock on my phone. The 30 minutes were up. I walked toward the doorway, ignoring the frantic pleading and the muffled cries coming from the stairwell. Officer Miller looked at his watch and nodded once, his expression serious. Time is up, I announced, my voice sharp and clear. Everyone out. Now. Otis stumbled down the last few steps, dragging 2 ripped garbage bags overflowing with sweaters and mismatched socks. He looked broken. He did not look at me. He walked straight out the door onto the cold pavement, the man who had always commanded respect, now reduced to carrying trash. Verna followed, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She was clutching a black plastic bag in one hand, and in the other she was carrying a small, polished wooden box. She tried to slip past me quickly. Stop, I commanded. Verna froze. I pointed at the box. What is in there? It is my prayer box, Verna whimpered. Just church things. It is personal. The contents of this house belong to my holding company, Verna, I said. Set it down. Now. She reluctantly placed the box on the foyer table. I nodded toward the door. You are done, Mom. Go. She gave me a look of pure hatred, then shuffled out to join Otis on the curb. Tanisha was next. She came down the stairs slowly, her eyes filled with defiance. She was carrying 3 bags of clothing, but tucked tightly under her arm was a small collection of designer handbags, a Dior saddlebag, a Gucci Dionysus, and a classic Chanel flap. These bags alone were worth more than the $70,000 debt she and Brad had amassed. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. Drop them, Tanisha. She stopped dead. No, she snapped. These are mine. I bought them. These are mine and you cannot take them. You bought them with the $200,000 home equity line of credit Mom and Dad took out to fund your lifestyle, I said. You bought them with the money stolen from my safe. Those bags are collateral, Tanisha. They belong to me now. She tightened her grip on the smooth leather. You are a thief. You are a monster. I hate you. I nodded. I am the bank, Tanisha. The bank collects. Hand them over. She threw the bags onto the floor one by one, screaming obscenities under her breath. The Chanel landed with a soft thud. I bent down and picked up the bags, carefully inspecting the leather. They were worth a lot more than the jewelry my parents had pawned. Officer Miller escorted Tanisha out onto the street. She joined her parents, who were standing on the curb next to their trash bags of possessions, looking up at the dark, imposing windows of the home they had lost. I looked at the three of them, Otis staring blankly ahead, Verna clutching her arms, Tanisha sobbing hysterically. They had nothing. No home, no money, no status. They were just three people standing on a cold Queens sidewalk with nowhere to go. I looked at the officer. "Lock it up," I said, "and make sure they understand they are not to set foot on this property ever again." I stepped back inside the house, and the locksmith sealed the door shut. The clicking of the deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I watched them standing there on the sidewalk through the newly sealed front window. I knew this was the final moment. I took a deep breath and opened the door one last time. Arthur stood behind me, holding his briefcase like a shield. I was holding a small, plain white envelope. Otis looked up, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Verna's face, which had been contorted with rage, smoothed instantly into a mask of maternal relief. She thought she had won. She thought the guilt had finally kicked in. Nia, Verna whispered, taking a hesitant step forward. "You came back. I knew you would not leave your father on the street." I ignored her completely. I walked over to Otis and extended the envelope. "This is the last thing I will ever give you, Dad," I said. Otis took it with shaking hands, his fingers fumbling with the seal. Tanisha craned her neck, trying to peer over his shoulder, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. They expected cash. They expected a check. They expected a down payment on a new life of entitlement. Otis tore open the envelope. He pulled out two crisp pieces of paper. The first was a one-way Greyhound bus ticket. The destination was not Miami or Los Angeles. It was a small, isolated town in the Midwest I had specifically researched for its quiet anonymity and tough job market. The second paper was a receipt for 30 nights at a budget motel, prepaid, 1 month of shelter. Verna snatched the receipt from Otis' hand. "What is this?" she shrieked. "A motel, a bus ticket. We are not taking the bus. We are not living in a motel. This is an insult." "This is reality, Mom," I said coldly. "That money you stole from my safe is gone. This is the only thing standing between you and the jail cell that Tanisha narrowly avoided in Rome. The police report for grand larceny is already filed. I am just holding the activation button." I looked at Otis. "This is your final chance to start over. The funds will cover your rent for 30 days. The ticket will take you to a town where no one knows the name Brooks. It is a clean slate. You will find honest work. You will not use Tanisha's trauma for pity. You will not beg. You will live honestly. If you contact me again," I continued, my voice hardening, "if you try to return to this city, or if you attempt to use any fraudulent scheme to get money, I will immediately activate the police report for grand larceny and wire fraud. The police will issue warrants. That 30-minute grace period you had inside the house was the extent of my mercy. Do you understand the condition?" Verna looked ready to launch herself at me, but Otis grabbed her arm. He looked at the bus tickets, then at the motel receipt, then at the imposing dark house behind me. He looked at the sealed door that represented all their ruined hopes. He nodded slowly. "We understand, Nia," he whispered, his voice defeated. I did not respond. I turned and walked back up the driveway. I got into my car. I watched them standing there on the curb, huddled together against the cold, holding a one-way ticket to oblivion. The car pulled away, leaving them on the sidewalk to face the consequences they had earned. Otis stood there on the cold curb, clutching the bus tickets. He looked at Verna, who was still shivering, but her eyes had a hard, calculating glint. They had survived. They were going to the motel. But Tanisha was still there. Verna walked over to her daughter, who was huddled miserably over her bags of stolen clothes. She did not kneel. She did not offer comfort. She looked at Tanisha like she was inspecting a piece of debris. "We are leaving, Tanisha," Verna announced, her voice dry and brittle. "Otis and I are taking the bus." Tanisha looked up, her face streaked with dirt and despair. "But Mom, we are family. We have to stick together." Verna gave a harsh laugh. Family does not steal from family. You stole our peace. You stole our security. You stole the only money we had left. We gambled everything on you being successful and you failed us. This is the end of the line. You are not coming with us. Otis stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Tanisha's shoulder and gently nudging her away from Verna. You brought this on yourself, Tanisha, he said, his voice flat and empty. You stole that money. You ran up the debt. You are the reason we signed the papers. You destroyed everything. You are on your own now. Tanisha stared at her parents, her golden world shattering completely. The mother who had always protected her, always defended her laziness, was now throwing her onto the street. You are leaving me here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Verna nodded. We are starting a new life, a life without debt, a life without chaos, a life without you. You figure out your life, Tanisha. You will not drag us down anymore. Otis pulled his wife away. He looked at Tanisha one last time. There was no pity in his eyes, only resignation. He walked away from his daughter down the street, Verna's arm tucked securely into his. They did not look back. They walked toward the bus stop, leaving their most precious possession to rot on the sidewalk. Tanisha let out a primal scream. She was alone. She was penniless. She was completely broken. She scrambled to her feet, running after them, screaming for her mother, begging her father to come back. They kept walking, ignoring her pleas, as if the sound of her agony was nothing more than the noise of the traffic. Tanisha fell back onto the pavement, clutching the cold metal of her empty suitcase. She had lost Brad, who stole her money. She had lost her parents, who stole her belief in family. She had lost everything. The golden child was abandoned by her own court. She was left on the curb, the final casualty of her own entitlement. 1 month later, the house stood empty but for the dust. The legal paperwork had cleared faster than Arthur had predicted. The furniture, the cheap electronics, the appliances, all of it had been officially liquidated to cover the $50,000 debt and the remaining legal fees. The house was finally mine. And I was going to strip it down to the studs. I hired a demolition crew and gave them one order: destroy the memory. I watched from the street as they tore out the hideous floral wallpaper Verna had loved and ripped up the stained carpet Tanisha had ruined. I wanted every ounce of the toxicity scraped clean. The hammer blows against the drywall sounded like the breaking of the final chains. I walked through the wreckage of the living room, the space where Otis had sat in silent judgment for 20 years. The walls were bare. The floorboards were exposed. I felt a cleansing silence. This house had been a monument to greed and emotional extortion. Now it was a blank slate. I decided it was time to build a new legacy. Not one based on debt and drama, but one based on empowerment. I worked with my firm's nonprofit division to establish a new venture, the Brooks Empowerment Center. It was to be a fully funded safe haven for young women of color who had the talent but lacked the financial security and family support to escape toxic environments. My goal was simple: to create a place that gave young women the resources I had desperately needed at 22 when my own family started sabotaging my future. The mansion that was once used to project a false image of perfection would now be used to nurture actual potential. I poured my energy into the renovation. The former master bedroom, Verna's domain, was redesigned as a financial literacy classroom. Tanisha's inventory room, the symbol of her failed greed, was designated as a career counseling office. I saw the ironic justice in transforming the symbols of their corruption into instruments of genuine change. I personally designed the security system, ensuring this house would be a true sanctuary, a fortress of protection, not manipulation. When the project was complete, the house would not just be structurally sound, it would be spiritually redeemed. It would not be a Brooks family residence. It would be a monument to self-worth and resilience for the next generation of women who were told they were too much or not enough. This project was my true therapy, my final step in paying off the emotional debt of my childhood. 1 year later, the Brooks Empowerment Center was running smoothly. My life had settled into a rhythm of purpose and peace. The legal battles were over. Otis and Verna were living in the small prepaid motel in the Midwest, desperately looking for work. Tanisha was long gone, having fled that town after realizing there was no one left to steal from. They had gotten the consequences they earned, and I had achieved the justice I needed. I had not heard from them directly in months. Until today. I was 35,000 feet above the Atlantic again, heading to the Amalfi Coast this time. Alone. On purpose. I was not wearing a power suit. I was wearing cashmere and sipping a perfectly chilled glass of Dom Perignon. The cabin was quiet, and the leather was soft. This was the vacation I had paid for. The vacation I had earned. I looked out the window watching the clouds drift by, feeling a contentment that had been foreign to me for 32 years. I had nothing to prove to anyone. I thought about the past year. I had not just destroyed my family's facade. I had built a refuge out of their ruin. The center was thriving, helping young women achieve the financial independence my parents had tried to sabotage in me. That was the ultimate triumph. My trauma had become someone else's safety net. My phone resting silently on the mahogany tray table buzzed faintly. I picked it up. Unknown number. But the text message preview was visible enough. Need money for medicine. Your father is sick. Please, Nia. I stared at the screen. The familiar script of guilt and desperation. They were testing the boundary one last time. They were trying to pull me back into the toxicity. They were trying to make me the savior again. I looked down at the notification. I looked at the glass of champagne in my hand. I looked out the window at the vast, endless blue sky. Freedom. I smiled. It was not a smile of anger or triumph. It was a smile of absolute finality. I tilted the screen toward the bubbling champagne. With a slow, deliberate motion, I dropped the phone directly into the glass. The champagne fizzed and foamed instantly, shorting out the screen. The phone was silenced. The connection to my old life was severed completely. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my seat. The light dimmed over the Atlantic. The end. Based on the compiled narrative of family betrayal, the primary lesson centers on self-worth boundaries and financial independence. The protagonist, Nia, learned that unconditional love and support cannot be expected from toxic family members, even in moments of crisis. The greatest power she gained was not revenge, but the ability to enforce strict boundaries and stop funding the dysfunction. Documentation and independent wealth served as the ultimate armor against manipulation and financial theft. True freedom is achieved when you prioritize your own safety and financial independence over maintaining a false image of family harmony. Do not wait for validation. Create your own power and protection. Share your own story of establishing boundaries and finding peace after family betrayal, and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your worth.